My name is Leon. I'm 26 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the background character in my own family. Not the golden child, not the troublemaker, just the one who existed in the shadows of my younger brother, Evan. Growing up, I used to think it was normal for parents to have favorites. Maybe every family leaned one way or another. But in my house, the favoritism wasn't a lean. It was a spotlight burning bright on him, while I stood outside in the dark, trying not to trip on the cracks in the floor. It started small, the kind of things you brush off when you're a kid. If Evan and I both brought home good grades, he'd get a new video game, while I'd get a pat on the back and a reminder to try even harder next time. At birthdays, he'd get a cake with his favorite flavor, balloons, a pile of gifts. Mine? Sometimes a half-hearted cupcake or a card that felt like an afterthought. I told myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't the type to crave attention. But deep down, every skipped acknowledgement chipped away at me, leaving this quiet ache I carried into adulthood. By the time I turned 26, I thought I had grown numb to it. I had my own job, a small apartment I paid for myself, and a few friends who made me feel seen in a way my family never did. Still, I came home for birthdays, anniversaries, and dinners because some part of me still wanted to believe my parents cared. I clung to the hope that maybe, one day, things would balance out. My birthday this year was supposed to be a quiet one. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a card, maybe dinner together. We gathered in the living room, and I noticed right away that there was only one neatly wrapped box on the coffee table. It was small, with shiny blue paper and a ribbon. I smiled faintly, convincing myself that maybe, just maybe, they had actually remembered me this time. But when my mom picked up the box and handed it to Evan, my stomach twisted. "This is from us," she said brightly, watching as he tore into the wrapping paper with that grin he always wore when the world revolved around him. Inside was a sleek smartwatch, the exact one I had been saving up to buy for myself. My father chuckled as Evan slipped it onto his wrist, saying, "Perfect fit for the perfect son." I sat there frozen, my smile plastered on like a mask, my fingers digging into my jeans. Then my mom turned to me and said words that burned into my memory. "Leon, you don't deserve anything right now. You should be grateful we even let you come over." It was like the air got sucked out of the room. Evan laughed softly, not maliciously, but in that careless way someone laughs when they're used to being adored. I felt my chest tighten, my heart pounding, but I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even leave. I just sat there, silent, nodding as if I agreed with them. Inside, though, something cracked. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I went back to my room in the house I grew up in, my old room that still smelled faintly of dust and old carpet, and I started packing. Not frantically, not with tears streaming down my face, but slowly, deliberately. Each shirt folded neatly into the suitcase, each book stacked carefully. I didn't slam drawers or stomp down the hallway. I didn't want them to hear me. I wanted to leave the same way they treated me, without acknowledgement. By morning, my car was loaded. I stood in the driveway for a moment, looking back at the house where I had spent years of my life waiting for something that never came. No one noticed me pulling away. No one came outside to stop me. It was as if I had been erased before I even left. Weeks passed. I didn't reach out. I didn't answer their calls, not that there were many. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace, like I had finally cut the strings holding me in place. I poured my time into work, into building something of my own, into surrounding myself with people who actually valued me. But then came the moment that made me realize the story wasn't over. Weeks later, on Evan's birthday, while they gathered again around the table with cake and candles, singing to him like always, their phones lit up all at once. 74 missed calls. A single message waiting, one they never expected to see. And that's where everything began to change. I didn't send that message lightly. It wasn't some impulsive act of anger. It was calculated, the result of weeks of silence where I finally had time to think, really think, about how my family treated me. But before I get to that message, I need to explain how the tension had been simmering long before my birthday. Because the truth is, that one night wasn't an isolated event. It was just the breaking point in a long pattern of mistreatment. Growing up, Evan was the son, and we were all expected to orbit around him. If he wanted something, it was delivered. If I wanted something, it was too expensive or not practical. I remember once when I was 16, I saved for months doing odd jobs just to buy a guitar. The day I brought it home, my dad looked at me and said, Why waste your money on that? You'll never be good enough to play anywhere. I laughed it off then, tried to shrug it away, but Evan? When he turned 16, they surprised him with a car. A used one, sure, but still, a car. And when he scratched it a week later because he was texting while driving, Dad patted him on the back and said, "Don't worry, son, we'll get it fixed." That was the way it always went. If Evan failed, it was a learning experience. If I succeeded, it wasn't enough. And as adults, nothing had changed. I remember one Thanksgiving not long before my birthday. I brought a bottle of wine I had saved up for, something special. My mom glanced at it, muttered, "Cheap," under her breath, and shoved it to the side. Evan walked in late, empty-handed, and everyone lit up like he was some celebrity making an entrance. He told one joke about his job, and suddenly he was the most charming man alive. Meanwhile, when I shared news about a promotion I'd worked years for, my father said, "Don't get cocky. That place will replace you in a heartbeat." It wasn't just neglect, it was dismissal. Like I wasn't a real person with accomplishments or feelings. And the more I think back on it now, the more I realize they weren't just blind to me, they chose to belittle me. After I left that night with my suitcase, I promised myself I wouldn't go back. But silence doesn't stop old wounds from throbbing. My mother would occasionally text me short messages, things like, "Family dinner Sunday, don't forget," as if nothing had happened. No acknowledgement of what they'd said to me on my birthday, no apology. Once, she even sent me a photo of Evan wearing the smartwatch, with a caption, "Doesn't it suit him perfectly?" It was like they enjoyed reminding me of my place. Then there was my father. He called me one evening after I'd been gone for 2 weeks. His tone wasn't warm, wasn't curious about how I was doing. It was sharp, condescending. "Your mother's worried you're ignoring us. Don't be dramatic, Leon. You've always been too sensitive." Evan didn't mean anything by it. You should be proud of him. He's making us all proud. Proud. That word felt like a knife. It was always about Evan. His new job. His new apartment. His girlfriend. His prospects. I could have climbed a mountain and planted a flag with my bare hands, and they'd still tell me I was standing in the wrong spot. The worst part came when they started to use guilt as a weapon. My mom called one night while I was working late, her voice dripping with practiced sadness. "You know, Leon, you're tearing the family apart with this distance. Evan misses you. We all miss you. Don't let pride ruin everything." I didn't say anything, but inside I wanted to scream. Pride? That's what they thought this was about. But then the manipulation took an uglier turn. My father showed up at my apartment once. He didn't call ahead, didn't knock politely, just barged in like he still owned a piece of me. He looked around, unimpressed, and said, "So this is where you've been hiding. Do you really think you can shut us out? Family is family, Leon. Don't forget who gave you everything." Everything. That word echoed in my head. Did they really believe they gave me everything? I thought of every night I stayed up late studying alone, every shift I worked to cover my own expenses, every insult dressed up as advice. They hadn't given me everything. They had taken more than they ever gave. And through all of this, Evan stayed silent. He never reached out, never apologized, never even asked why I left. Instead, I'd see him in pictures online, surrounded by my parents, living in the comfort I was denied. In one photo, he was cutting into a cake while my mother clapped and my father beamed. It wasn't even his birthday. It was mine. That's when I realized the truth. My family didn't just prefer Evan. They had erased me from their story. And if they were going to erase me, I was going to rewrite the ending myself. Which brings me back to that night. Evan's birthday. The candles were lit. The singing had begun. And for a moment, they were basking in their perfect little world again. But then their phones buzzed. First one, then another, then all of them. Notifications piling up in quick succession. Missed calls, 74 in total. And at the center of it all, a message they never expected. That was the moment the balance began to shift. The night of Evan's birthday should have been uneventful for me. I was miles away, sitting in my apartment with a glass of water in hand, trying not to think about them. But the truth is, I knew exactly what they were doing. I could picture the cake, the candles, the way my mother's voice would lead the song slightly off-key, my father's booming laugh echoing through the house. And I knew Evan would be standing there, basking in it all, smiling like he deserved every ounce of their affection. That picture used to hurt me, but now it fueled me. That was the night I pulled the trigger on something I had been quietly setting up for weeks. See, when I left their house after my birthday, I didn't just pack my clothes. I took my old file box with me, the one that held years of bank statements, receipts, and paperwork. My parents had always underestimated me, but one thing they never realized was that I noticed everything. Every missing dollar from the savings account I'd worked at as a teenager, every time they borrowed money that was never returned, every bill that somehow ended up in my name instead of theirs. When I was 19, my father had pressured me into co-signing a loan for the family's benefit. I didn't even know at the time that he'd pinned the responsibility squarely on me, while Evan enjoyed the car that loan bought. I spent years quietly paying it down, while they pretended it never existed. It wasn't just money, though. It was trust. When I was 22, I came home early one evening and overheard my parents talking about me in the kitchen. My mom's voice was sharp, dismissive. Leon will never be anything. He doesn't have the charisma, the confidence. We should invest in Evan. He's our real future. My father agreed, laughing as he said, Leon's the safety net, the backup. He'll never shine. I stood in the hallway that night, invisible, realizing in one crushing moment that I wasn't just unloved. I was insurance. Someone they could rely on only when things went wrong. That memory haunted me, but now it became fuel. So in the weeks after I left, I started making quiet moves. I called the bank. I pulled every record with my name on it. I consulted a lawyer, a calm man with steel gray hair who looked at the paperwork and raised an eyebrow. Leon, he said, do you realize how much liability they've shoved onto you without your consent? Hearing it from him made my stomach twist, but it also solidified my resolve. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. They had used me, over and over, and now they were going to see the consequences. The betrayal that stung the most, though, came just a few days before Evan's birthday. I was scrolling through social media late at night when I saw a post from him, a photo of the smartwatch on his wrist, captioned, "Thanks to Mom and Dad for the best birthday gift early. Couldn't ask for a better family." Early. My gift. The one I had saved for, hinted about, hoped for. The one they had snatched away from me with a smile and handed to him. It wasn't just a watch. It was a symbol, proof that no matter what I did, no matter how much I worked or achieved, I would always be second place in their eyes. That was the moment something in me hardened. I had always clung to this fragile thread of hope that maybe, one day, they'd see me differently. But that post cut the thread clean. I wasn't part of their family, not really. I was a placeholder, a name on documents, someone to dismiss when convenient and lean on when necessary. And so, on the night of Evan's birthday, as they sang and laughed, their phones lit up. 74 missed calls. A message waiting. The message wasn't angry. It wasn't a rant. It was short, almost cold. Check your accounts. Within minutes, I knew the celebration had soured. Because while they were busy pouring cake slices and singing songs, the financial rug they had been standing on for years was being pulled right out from under them. But the money was only the beginning. Because the real betrayal, the one they never saw coming, wasn't just financial. It was the truth I was about to lay bare, the truth I had carried in silence for years. And when that truth came out, it wouldn't just break their trust in me. It would shatter the perfect little world they had built around Evan. After I sent that message, those 3 simple words, check your accounts, I thought I'd feel instant relief. I thought the years of being dismissed, belittled, and erased would suddenly fall off my shoulders. Instead, I sat in my apartment with the silence pressing against my chest, a heavy, suffocating kind of silence. My phone buzzed relentlessly for hours. First from unknown numbers, then from my mother, then my father, then even Evan. I didn't answer a single one. I just stared at the screen as the calls stacked up. 10, 20, 50, 74. I turned the phone face down and let it vibrate against the table until the battery died. But the aftermath wasn't clean. Revenge isn't a switch you flip. It's messy, complicated, and it always drags pieces of you down with it. For the next few days, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed moments from my childhood. Sitting at the dinner table while Evan told stories and everyone laughed, while I pushed food around my plate, invisible. My dad's voice telling me I'd never amount to anything. My mom sighing whenever I spoke, like my words were a burden. I had thought that by finally standing up for myself, I'd be free. But freedom has a strange way of feeling empty when you've been chained for so long. Then the fallout began. My parents didn't just call, they showed up. It was a Thursday evening when I heard the knock. No, not a knock, a pounding on my apartment door. I didn't move. I just sat there, my heart racing, as my mother's voice rang through the hallway. Leon, open this door right now. What have you done? Do you have any idea what position you've put us in? My father's voice followed, lower but sharper. You're going to regret this. Family isn't something you walk away from. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I waited until their voices faded, until the sound of their car pulling away finally left the night quiet again. But something about their anger lingered in the air, like smoke after a fire. I realized then that for the first time, they weren't dismissing me. They were afraid of me. And oddly, that fear made me feel both powerful and utterly alone. The loneliness cut deeper than I expected. My friends noticed it too. One night, I was sitting with Marcus, a guy I'd known since college, and he leaned across the table and asked, "Man, are you okay? You've been different lately." I wanted to tell him everything. But how do you explain years of invisible wounds to someone who hasn't lived them? I just shrugged, muttered something about stress at work, and changed the subject. Inside, though, I was unraveling. Work was no escape either. My mind wandered constantly, my focus slipping. My boss pulled me aside after a meeting and said, "Leon, you're usually sharp as a tack. What's going on?" I didn't have an answer. How could I explain that while my colleagues were worried about deadlines and projects, I was stuck replaying the sound of my father's laugh when he called me a failure, the way my mother's eyes glazed over whenever I spoke. The lowest point came one night when I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth and barely recognized myself. My eyes looked hollow, my face pale, my shoulders slumped like I was carrying weights no one else could see. For a moment, I wondered if they had been right all along, if I really was the background character in my own life. But then something shifted. It was subtle, like a flicker of light in a dark tunnel. I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't bound to their approval. They could hate me, call me dramatic, call me ungrateful, but none of that mattered anymore. I had broken the script they'd written for me, and that meant I could start writing my own. So I began planning quietly. Not grand schemes of revenge, at least, not yet. Just small steps toward reclaiming myself. I started documenting everything. Every loan, every account, every moment I had evidence of being used as a scapegoat. I bought a second file box and organized it neatly, label by label, like a soldier preparing an arsenal. It wasn't about striking back yet. It was about making sure that when the time came, I wouldn't falter. I also started pulling away more deliberately. If my parents texted, I didn't respond. If they showed up, I didn't answer. Evan tried once, leaving a voicemail that was surprisingly calm. "Leon, I don't know what's going on, but you don't have to do this. Just call me, okay?" I stared at that message for a long time. Maybe part of him meant it. But then I remembered the photo of the watch, the smug caption, the years of him standing silently while I was erased. No, Evan wasn't innocent. He was complicit. Every day felt like walking a tightrope between despair and determination. I had moments where I wanted to cave, to go back, to apologize just to feel like I had a family again. But then I'd open my file box, run my hands over the documents, and remind myself, they chose this path. They chose to betray me. And as I slowly steadied myself, I began to see a new horizon. I didn't just want to break away anymore. I wanted to rise so high that they would choke on their own words when they saw me again. But before that rise, I had to endure the fall. And the fall was far from over. The weeks after that rock-bottom stretch were some of the hardest of my life. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with small choices, things that didn't seem monumental at first, but added up to something bigger. I forced myself to run every morning, even when my body ached and my mind screamed at me to stay in bed. At first, I couldn't manage more than a mile without stopping, but eventually, I found myself running further, faster, stronger. Every drop of sweat felt like I was pushing out years of neglect, years of invisible weight. I poured myself into work too, but this time with a sharper edge. Instead of letting my family's voices echo in my head, telling me I wasn't enough, I drowned them out with results. I stayed late at the office, not out of desperation, but because I wanted to prove to myself what I was capable of when I wasn't dragging their baggage behind me. My projects started getting noticed. My boss pulled me aside one Friday afternoon and said, "Leon, you've really stepped up lately. I'm considering you for a leadership position on the next rollout." That single sentence lit a fire in me. For the first time, someone saw me not as a placeholder, not as the safety net, but as someone worthy of leading. The improvement didn't stop there. The lawyer I'd met with kept in touch, asking for more documents, guiding me through steps I never would have taken on my own. "Leon," he said during one call, "this isn't just about protecting yourself. With what you've got here, you can build leverage. Real leverage." That word echoed in my head for days. Leverage. I started networking, reaching out to colleagues and contacts I had overlooked before. Marcus introduced me to a small group of entrepreneurs who met weekly at a quiet cafe downtown. At first, I just listened, absorbing their conversations about investments, startups, and strategies. But one evening, I shared an idea I'd been developing quietly, a streamlined tool for small businesses to manage invoices, something I had tinkered with during long nights when I couldn't sleep. They didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss me. They leaned in, asked questions, offered feedback. By the end of the night, one of them said, "Leon, you might be onto something here." That was the first time I realized I didn't just have to rise. I could build something entirely new. Money, which had always been a sore point thanks to my family's manipulation, started to shift in my favor too. I'd been saving steadily, and with the lawyer's help, I uncovered accounts my parents had tied to my name that I had legal grounds to reclaim. It wasn't an overnight windfall, but it was enough to breathe easier, to invest in myself instead of constantly being drained. Meanwhile, the silence from my family grew heavier. My parents stopped showing up at my apartment, though their messages still came through in bursts, guilt-ridden one day, angry the next. "You're tearing us apart. Why are you punishing us like this? Family is everything. And then, you'll regret turning your back on us." I stopped reading them. I stopped letting their words burrow into my skin. Evan, however, was different. He reached out more than once, his tone softer, almost pleading. "Leon, I don't get it. You've always been there for me. Why are you doing this now? We're brothers." The first time, I nearly answered. But then I remembered every birthday where he blew out candles while I sat forgotten in the corner, every time he wore the crown they handed him without once saying, "What about Leon?" His silence all those years spoke louder than any words he could give me now. As the months passed, the contrast between my old life and my new one sharpened. I was running in the mornings, leading projects at work, sketching plans for my startup at night, and for the first time, I wasn't weighed down by their constant shadow. I was free, and with that freedom came something I'd never felt before: control. Control over my choices. Control over my future. Control over the story they had tried to erase me from. And the more I built myself up, the more I realized that my rise wasn't just about me anymore. It was about power. Power they never thought I could have. Power they would never see coming. Because when the time was right, I wasn't just going to walk into their world again. I was going to turn it upside down. The rise was steady, but what came next was the turning point. The moment where all the pieces began to align in a way that almost felt fated. By then, 6 months had passed since I'd walked out of that house with my suitcase. In that time, I had transformed. I wasn't the silent shadow at the family table anymore. I was someone with momentum, someone with direction. And then, almost by accident, I stumbled into the opportunity that would set the stage for everything that followed. It started at work. After months of grinding, the leadership role my boss hinted at finally became official. I was given oversight of a mid-sized team for a new project, one with real visibility, real weight. It wasn't just about the title or the pay raise, though those were nice. It was about credibility. Suddenly, my name carried weight in circles I'd never been allowed into before. Meetings where I used to sit quietly in the corner were now meetings where people turned to me for decisions. It was subtle, but every "what do you think, Leon?" chipped away at the years of being silenced at home. But what made the position truly powerful wasn't just the role, it was the access. I was now in touch with clients, vendors, and business partners, many of whom had deep ties in the community. One of them was a man named Harrison, an older entrepreneur who had been around long enough to know everyone. He had a way of leaning back in his chair during conversations, studying me with sharp eyes that missed nothing. After one meeting, he pulled me aside and said, "You remind me of myself when I was younger. Smart, but underestimated. Don't waste time proving yourself to people who'll never see your worth. Build your own table." That sentence stuck with me. Build your own table. I started spending more time with Harrison outside of work. Coffee meetings, networking events, quiet dinners where he shared stories of how he'd been overlooked early in his career, too. One evening, after I told him about my idea for the small business invoicing tool, he tapped his finger against the table and said, "Leon, you've got something there. And I know people who'd be interested in backing you if you're serious." That was the first spark of something bigger than just escaping my family's shadow. It was the beginning of building a future they could never touch. But the real setup for revenge came in the most unexpected way. While digging deeper into my finances with my lawyer, we uncovered something unusual, records tied not just to me, but to Evan. My parents, in their endless favoritism, had been sloppy. They had opened a joint account years ago, one that technically listed both Evan and me as legal guardians when we were minors. But here's the thing. Even after we were adults, they had kept my name attached to certain assets. Assets Evan was now dipping into freely, under the assumption that everything belonged to him. My lawyer leaned back in his chair when he showed me the paperwork and said, "They've built their little empire on shaky ground. And you, Leon, you're standing on the foundation." For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding scraps. I was holding the cards. The thought both thrilled and terrified me. With a few signatures, with the right moves, I could pull the rug out from under them. Not just my parents, but Evan too. But I didn't rush. I knew better now. Revenge wasn't about striking fast. It was about waiting until the blade would cut deepest. So I kept building. I poured more into my startup idea, secured Harrison's mentorship, and slowly grew a small circle of allies who respected me for my work, not for my family name. I ran every morning, sharpened my mind, and reminded myself daily, patience. Then, one night, I overheard something that confirmed it was time to prepare my move. I had gone to a networking event, and while chatting with a mutual contact, I heard them mention my brother's name. "Evan," they said with a laugh. "Oh, he's always at those fancy galas. Loves flashing money around. Can't hold on to anything for more than a week, though." It hit me like lightning. My brother was out there living recklessly, flaunting wealth that wasn't entirely his, built on accounts and loans tied partly to my name. He thought he was untouchable, still wearing the crown my parents had handed him. But crowns built on borrowed thrones don't last forever. I walked home that night with a strange calm settling over me. My parents had taught me my whole life that I was powerless. They had used me as a scapegoat, a backup plan, a forgotten shadow. But now, I wasn't just rising. I was standing in a position where, with the right push, I could flip their entire world upside down. And I knew exactly how to do it. Revenge wasn't fire. It wasn't rage. It wasn't some wild, explosive act meant to burn everything at once. It was cold, deliberate, and quiet, like ice creeping across a window pane, slow and inevitable. By the time I finally made my move, I wasn't trembling with anger anymore. I was calm, almost too calm, because I knew what was coming, and they didn't. The first strike was paperwork. With my lawyer's help, I initiated the transfer of those accounts. Yes, the very ones my parents had kept in my name, but funneled toward Evan's luxuries. They'd assumed I would never look closely, never realize the fine print made me a partial owner. But the law doesn't care about assumptions. With the right signatures and filings, the accounts shifted under my control. It wasn't theft. It wasn't manipulation. It was reclaiming what had always legally been tied to me. By the time Evan realized he couldn't swipe his card for another night out, the funds were already locked and redirected. I imagined the look on his face when the transaction failed, the sudden confusion, the phone call to mom, the frantic scrambling. It almost made me laugh. But that was only the beginning. The second strike was exposure. I had kept records for years, stuffing them away in that dusty file box. Proof of loans, proof of debt shifted onto me, proof of negligence. With Harrison's connections, I didn't need to shout about it on social media or stage some dramatic confrontation. All it took was sharing those records with the right people, people whom my parents had spent years trying to impress in the community. Business acquaintances, church members, even a couple of extended relatives who had always been suspicious of how perfect Evan and my parents tried to appear. It was subtle, a quiet leak, a carefully dropped piece of information here and there. Enough for whispers to spread. Enough for the glossy image of the perfect family to crack. And then came the third strike, the one that truly turned the knife. Remember my startup idea? With Harrison's guidance and the small group of entrepreneurs backing me, it started gaining traction. Real traction. We secured our first round of funding, modest but strong, and suddenly I was the name being mentioned in circles my parents desperately wanted to be part of. Invitations started arriving, for panels, for networking dinners, for events where my name was on the program. So I decided to make my reappearance. It wasn't at a family dinner. It wasn't at their house. It was at a gala, one my parents and Evan were sure to attend, the kind where they could dress up and pretend they were part of something bigger. I arrived late, not out of carelessness, but intentionally, stepping into the grand hall in a fitted suit, not flashy but commanding. Conversations hushed as people recognized me, not as the forgotten son, but as the face of a rising business they'd been hearing about. I saw them before they saw me. My mother, laughing too loudly at something trivial. My father, holding court near the bar. Evan, grinning with a drink in his hand, gesturing as if he owned the room. And then they noticed. My mother's smile froze. My father's glass paused midair. Evan blinked, confused, as though he was seeing a ghost. For a moment, none of them moved. And then, almost instinctively, they tried to recover, smiles pasted back on, arms open, as if nothing had ever happened. "Leon," my father said, voice booming but brittle. "Son, there you are. We've been meaning to." I didn't let him finish. I simply smiled, calm and collected, and said, "You might want to check your accounts." The color drained from his face. My mother's hand tightened on her glass, knuckles white. Evan shifted uncomfortably, pulling out his phone under the table like he couldn't help himself. When he saw the balance, I watched his expression crumble. Confusion, then panic, then a flash of anger he didn't know where to place. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need a scene. All I had to do was exist, successful, untouchable, standing on ground they never thought I could claim. And the whispers around the room did the rest. People were already talking about the accounts, about the loans, about the years of favoritism and misuse. My family's perfect mask was shattering right there in real time, and I didn't have to lift a finger. That was the beauty of it. Revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was standing there with a calm smile while the empire they built on my back collapsed around them. But this was only the beginning of their unraveling. The silence after my words, "You might want to check your accounts," hung in the air like a storm cloud. My father's jaw tightened, his booming voice failing him for the first time I could remember. My mother looked around the room, her eyes darting from one face to another as she realized the whispers weren't just whispers anymore. They were pointed, curious stares. And Evan looked at his phone like it had betrayed him, swiping again and again as if the numbers would change if he just looked hard enough. "Leon," my father finally managed, his voice low, dangerous. "What have you done?" But before I could even answer, someone else approached, Harrison. He shook my hand firmly, clapping me on the shoulder. "Leon, good to see you here. The work you're doing with your company? Impressive stuff. You're going to make a real impact." He didn't even acknowledge my family. To him, they were just shadows on the wall. That moment sealed it. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Me, recognized, respected, elevated, and them, exposed and unraveling. In the days that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. My parents' reputation, carefully constructed over decades, collapsed under the weight of truth. The leaked documents circulated further than I ever expected. Extended family who had always believed my parents' golden child narrative began calling me, not with pity, but with apologies. "We never knew, Leon," my aunt said softly over the phone. "We should have seen it sooner." Evan's life unraveled faster than theirs. The reckless spending, the debts hidden under charm, the accounts now out of his reach. Suddenly, he wasn't the golden boy anymore. His friends who had been drawn to his money drifted away when the free ride stopped. His girlfriend, who had once posted pictures of their lavish trips, deleted them quietly and disappeared from his life. And my parents? They tried, desperately, to salvage control. My mother called me, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard. "Leon, we didn't mean to hurt you. We love you. We've always loved you." But I heard the cracks in her tone, not love, but fear. Fear of losing everything. My father left me one last voicemail, his voice sharp and bitter. "You've ruined us. Do you understand that? You've destroyed this family." But he was wrong. They had destroyed it themselves, years ago, when they chose to give my life away piece by piece until I was left with nothing but silence. All I had done was refuse to carry their weight anymore. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel small. I felt free. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at a local business forum. Standing on that stage, looking out at a sea of faces, I realized this was the moment I had always dreamed of. Not applause, not attention, but respect. The kind of respect my family had denied me my whole life. And in that moment, I didn't need to think about them anymore. They had been my shadow for too long. As I finished my speech, I glanced at the back of the room. My parents weren't there. Evan wasn't there. They wouldn't be. Their world had crumbled, and mine had just begun. I left the stage to the sound of applause, not thunderous, not overwhelming, but steady and real. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I was enough. That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I pulled out my phone and typed one last message to my family. Not angry, not vengeful, just final. I didn't destroy this family. I simply stopped letting you destroy me. Goodbye. I hit send, slipped the phone into my pocket, and kept walking forward, without looking back. They didn't even bother to lie well, just copy-pasted the same excuse, word for word, like I wouldn't notice. I'm Nathan, 32, and I've never been the center of attention type. I've always been the guy who quietly shows up, pays the bill, picks up your dry cleaning when you forget, and somehow ends up being the designated driver at every family event, even when it wasn't supposed to be an event. I wasn't the golden child. That was my cousin Tasha, or maybe my brother Owen, or honestly, whoever had the loudest drama that month. But I was the one who could be counted on, the one they all appreciated in passing texts when rent was due or someone needed to use my Netflix. It was subtle, really, how you go from being part of the family to just being the financial safety net stitched underneath their messy lives. You don't notice it at first. You just think, well, they're struggling right now, and you help because that's what family's supposed to do. But then your birthday rolls around, and everyone suddenly has plans, except not with you. It started 2 weeks before, when I sent out a message to the family group chat. Hey, thinking of doing a birthday dinner, nothing fancy. Just a table at Amici's next Friday. Let me know if you can make it. I even offered to cover the bill. That part wasn't surprising. I always covered the bill. They'd stopped even reaching for their wallets years ago. The replies trickled in slowly, mostly thumbs up emojis or the classic, "I'll try to be there," from my mom, which was code for "I won't, but I don't want to argue about it right now." By the day of, I had only 2 confirmed guests, my Aunt Rhonda and her husband Paul. And even then, Rhonda had texted the night before, "If Paul's gout doesn't act up, we'll see you then, sweetheart." I should have seen it coming. But stupidly, I still dressed up, ironed my nicest shirt, reserved the big table, told the hostess we'd be at least 10, maybe more. She smiled politely and sat me near the window with enough place settings to suggest optimism. At 6 p.m., I sat alone, sipping water. At 6:15, the first message arrived. It was from my brother. "Hey man, something came up. We'll celebrate another time." I read it once, then twice. Something about it felt oddly impersonal. No explanation, no apologies, no real effort. 5 minutes later, my mom's message came in. Same wording, same punctuation. Something came up, "We'll celebrate another time." Then my uncle, then my cousin, one by one, as if coordinated. I stared at my phone, watching the chain of indifference unfold like a lazy production line. I stayed, ordered a pasta dish I didn't even want, told the waiter I'd wait a bit longer in case anyone else came. No one did. I paid the bill, left a good tip, walked out of the restaurant with a plastic bag of leftovers and the kind of quiet fury that doesn't boil, it freezes. Makes everything still. Numb. The parking lot was mostly empty by then. I sat in my car with the engine running, scrolling mindlessly. And that's when I saw it. My cousin Tasha's Instagram story. A boomerang of her holding a party hat over her French bulldog, Nibbles. Caption, "Happy birthday, Nibbles." There they all were. My mom, laughing with a slice of cake. My brother Owen, helping tie a bow on the dog's collar. My aunt, holding a champagne flute. The same people who had something come up. They were all there. For a dog. I don't know how long I sat there. At some point, my hands just moved on their own. I opened my banking app, clicked on the scheduled rent transfers for my mom's place. My brother's temporary loan repayment plan. The auto draft for my aunt's phone bill. The one I'd been covering since she got hacked and had to cancel her credit cards. I canceled every single one. Then I opened the utility dashboard. Gas, Power, water. Off. Not now. But by morning, they'd wake up to silence, and not the peaceful kind. And finally, I took the spare car key off the ring on my dashboard. It was for Owen's second-hand Audi, the one I'd co-signed for because he was getting back on his feet. I put it in my jacket pocket and drove home with my headlights off, the streets dark and quiet. I didn't send a message. I didn't comment. I didn't rage text the group chat or ask why. I let the silence sit. I let them wonder. The next morning, my phone buzzed. My mom, then Owen, then Tasha, all calling. I didn't answer. The group chat exploded with, "Is something wrong with the utilities? Nate, are you awake? Did the bank mess up your auto pay?" And then my personal favorite from my brother. "Bro, what's going on?" Nibble's party was kind of last minute. "You're overreacting." Overreacting. That was the word that caught in my throat. Later that day, I saw my mom posted a cryptic Facebook status. "Some people will punish you just for not being available on their schedule." Remember, family isn't conditional. It had 4 likes and 1 passive-aggressive comment from Rhonda saying, maybe if you appreciated him, he'd still pick up the phone. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I started looking at what else was under my name. Whose name was on the insurance policies? The gym memberships? The car registration? I realized something. I wasn't their family member. I was their infrastructure. Their walking, talking, rent-paying, utility-covering infrastructure. And I was about to disappear. That evening, my phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't just calls and texts, it was voicemails. Long ones. Rambling ones. Some angry, some pleading. My brother left one that started with, "Look, man," and spiraled into a guilt trip about how I'd always held money over the family's head, as if being responsible somehow made me a villain. My mom left 2 messages. The first was soft, sickly sweet. "Nathan, honey, this isn't like you. We all love you. Please don't do this. Just call me." The second, 2 hours later, had a different tone. "I don't know what kind of grudge you're holding, but punishing your own mother? That's a new low, even for you." A new low? For me? I didn't reply. I couldn't, not yet. I needed time to process, to keep myself from reacting emotionally. Because for once, I didn't want to just cut the cord. I wanted to expose it. Every twisted wire they'd tangled around me over the years. Every fake favor. Every manufactured emergency. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted them to sit in the dark long enough to realize how much power I'd given them and how little they'd earned it. So I made a list. It started with simple things. The phone plan under my name canceled. I didn't even warn them. Just logged in, hit remove user, and watched the confirmation email roll in. I imagined my cousin Tasha refreshing Instagram at the dog park and suddenly losing signal. My uncle yelling into his phone before realizing it wasn't on anymore. My brother? Oh, he'd probably try to blame it on the provider. Classic Owen. Then the car. I didn't take it back right away. I let him sit with it. Drive it a few more days. Feel normal. Then, on Saturday night, I parked down the block, walked to his driveway, and calmly drove off with it. The spare key still worked. It wasn't even locked. I left a sticky note on the windshield of his second car, the one he never drives because it's missing a tail light. Since I'm just a wallet, consider this a budget cut. By Monday, the panic began to spill from private texts into public performance. Owen posted on Facebook, "Family means loyalty. But apparently that only applies until you make more money than everyone else and suddenly you're better than us." He didn't tag me, of course. Cowards rarely do. But people in the comments knew exactly who he meant. A few even liked the post. His girlfriend commented, "You deserve better, babe." Better than what? A brother who paid your bills? Who funded your move 3 cities away? Who covered your medical bills when you couldn't afford insurance? I didn't respond. Instead, I emailed the landlord, my mother's landlord, actually. She'd been living in a duplex I owned outright, but technically the lease had been in my name for legal reasons. It had always been a handshake deal. No rent. Just help your family, she said. For 4 years, I did. Covered taxes, maintenance, even the occasional repainting. But now, I sent the email. This is official notice that the current tenant has 30 days to vacate the property unless she wishes to begin paying fair market rent, effective immediately. I attached photos of the property, a suggested rent agreement, and the updated account information for payment. I didn't even send her a copy. I knew it would find her. It did, within 48 hours, judging by the furious email I received from her with the subject line, "Wow. Really? Yes. Really?" It was like poking a beehive after years of them buzzing around me, convinced I'd never sweat back. Suddenly, I was cruel, heartless, overreacting. My mom, my brother, my cousin each had their own version of the same story, trying to twist the narrative that I was abandoning them, that I'd changed, that I was punishing them for one mistake. One mistake? Funny, because when I scrolled back through old texts, there wasn't one. There were hundreds. My birthday wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time I opened my eyes. The time they asked me to co-sign for Owen's car because he was starting a new job and then quit 3 weeks later to explore crypto. The time Tasha asked me to front her vet bill because Nibbles is like my baby and then posted selfies from a weekend spa trip. The time Mom called me crying because the water got shut off again and I wired her money without even asking questions. Every time I didn't ask. Every time I filled in the silence with trust and got drained. And the worst part? The guilt. The quiet, constant guilt that if I stopped helping, I would be the bad guy. That maybe I was being selfish. That maybe I was the problem. But standing there in the dark hallway of my apartment, phone buzzing with calls I no longer had to answer, I realized something. Guilt only works when you believe you owe them something. I didn't. Not anymore. And just when things started to settle, a knock at the door. Not loud. Just steady. Rhythmic. I opened it. Standing there in the hallway was Owen. His hoodie was half-zipped, his eyes bloodshot, not from crying, but from stress. He held his phone in one hand, shaking slightly. "You took my car," he said. No hello. No apology. Just that. I leaned against the door frame. Technically, my car. But go on. He looked at me, jaw tight. "This isn't how you fix things, man." I almost laughed. Fix things? You mean how you all lied and ditched me on my birthday and then threw a party for a literal dog? That wasn't the plan. Tasha said it was just going to be a few people and… Save it. I cut in. You could have called. You didn't. You could have texted something real. You didn't. You could have shown up at a Michi's. You didn't. But now you want to talk because the gravy train came off the rails. He flinched. Good. He rubbed his temple. Look, we messed up. I get it. But you don't have to burn everything down just to prove a point. I stared at him. No, I said. I don't have to. I want to. And then I shut the door. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Because now they were desperate. And desperate people? They start making moves they can't take back. The next move didn't come from Owen. It came from my mother. 3 days after that knock on my door, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name scrawled in familiar cursive. Inside was a letter, handwritten, 2 pages. And at the bottom of the second, folded with forced precision, was a faded photo of me, maybe 5 or 6 years old, smiling with a birthday cake in front of me and my mom standing behind, her hands on my shoulders like a picture-perfect parent. The letter started with, "I don't know when you became this cold, Nathan, but I miss my son." It continued with an elaborate retelling of my childhood. How much she sacrificed. How she worked nights to buy me that bike. How she never asked for anything in return but love and understanding. She wrote about losing your dad too soon and how hard it was to raise boys alone. And then the pivot came right on cue. "You always seem to understand, Nate. That's what made you special. You were the strong one. You never complained. You just helped. You always helped." That part hurt more than I expected. Because she was right. I did help, but not out of strength, out of obligation, out of fear, out of a deep, twisted belief that if I didn't carry their weight, no one else would. And worse, that maybe I wasn't worth anything to them unless I did. She ended the letter with, "I hope you find your way back to this family before it's too late. We still love you, even if you've forgotten how to love us back." It was a guilt grenade wrapped in nostalgia and tied with a bow of martyrdom. And for a second, just a second, I felt it working. I felt the old strings pull. Then I looked at the photo again. It wasn't the one I remembered. Because in my memory, that birthday had ended with me crying. My cake smashed. Owen had thrown it off the table because I got the bigger present. And my mom? She scolded me for making a scene. That photo was the only good part of that day. A free frame before the yelling started. A moment weaponized now to manipulate me. That was the turning point. The next morning, I boxed up the photo and letter and dropped them off at her porch unopened. Unfolded. No note. Just silence, returned to cinder. And that silence didn't last. Because the following week, they escalated. They sent someone to talk to me. Well, ambushed me, more like it. It was at a local cafe I used to visit on Thursdays during my lunch break. I hadn't changed my routine, which in hindsight was my mistake. I was sipping an Americano and reading a book when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. A book? Still pretending you're too smart for the rest of us, huh? I looked up. It was Uncle Darren. If you've ever met someone who managed to combine sleaze with a sense of entitlement so thick it should come with a warning label, you know the type. Darren had been cut off from half the family for borrowing money he never paid back, but somehow he always slithered back in during drama, like a vulture circling a fresh wound. He pulled out the chair across from me without asking and sat down like we were old buddies catching up. I told them not to send a letter. I said, "Nate's a man. You talk to men face to face. But your mom, she's got a soft heart, you know? That woman raised you." I didn't reply. I just stared at him. Calm. Blank. He took my silence as an invitation to continue. "Now, I don't know what kind of tantrum this is, or what they said to get you this mad, but you're hurting people who love you, kid. Your mom's a wreck. Your brother's sleeping on my couch. You really gonna keep this up?" I blinked slowly. "Is that the part you were sent here to say? Or is the guilt trip just a bonus?" His smirk dropped slightly. "I came because I care," he said. "But if you keep going down this road, you're gonna find yourself real alone, Nathan. That's not what family does." I leaned forward. "No," I said. "That's exactly what family does. My family, at least, pretends silence is love. Pretends obligation is connection. Pretends guilt is currency." He sat back, mouth twitching. "I'm not the bad guy here," he muttered. "You were never even part of the story," I said, picking up my cup. He didn't leave quietly. He huffed, muttered something under his breath, and knocked over the creamer tray as he stormed out. The barista gave me a look. I shrugged and returned to my book. But that wasn't the end. That was just the preview. Because 2 days later, I got a notification from my bank. Someone had attempted to log into my account. Then again, and again. Password reset requests. Access denied. I changed everything. Locked it all down. Contacted my bank and flagged every account under my name. I'd grown up with these people. I knew how desperate they could get when things stopped being convenient. And then came the text that confirmed it all. From Owen. "You think you're better than us? Fine. Just remember who changed your diapers. Who fed you. You owe this family everything. And when mom's gone, don't show up crying." I stared at the screen. For a long time. That last line? That was it. That was the line they always used when they needed to guilt me into coming back. When mom's gone, it wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. They still thought I could be manipulated. Still thought love meant debt. Still thought I could be scared into returning. But this time, I wasn't walking away. This time, I was cutting them out. And the way I'd do it would leave no room for comeback, no misunderstanding, no public Facebook martyrdom. They were about to feel what life without me really looked like. I didn't respond to Owen's message. Not with a text, not with a call, not with a single word. Instead, I logged into the financial management software I use for my consulting work, the same one where I'd set up all the recurring payments, emergency transfers, and family-linked accounts. For years, I had folders labeled Family Support, subcategories named after the people I was helping: Mom Utilities, Owen's Auto, Tasha Pet Emergencies. What started as short-term help slowly became permanent lifelines. None of them ever asked when it would stop. They just assumed it wouldn't. That day, I deleted the entire folder. But I wasn't done. I spent the next week preparing my final move. Not a revenge stunt, not a dramatic explosion, something clean, unmistakable, permanent. I sold the duplex my mother was living in. It was entirely in my name. I bought it years ago after landing my first major client. I offered it to her as a temporary place to stay while she got back on her feet after a bad investment. But there was never a plan to move out, never a talk about rent, never a gesture of appreciation. The place had become a monument to her entitlement, and I was tired of preserving it. I didn't evict her. I sold the entire property to a development firm that was buying up half the neighborhood. They paid well above market value. They asked no questions. I signed, closed, and let the process move on its own. 2 weeks later, she got the notice from the new owners. I expected a storm. What I got was silence for 3 whole days. Then the voicemail came. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Her voice was cold, controlled. "So that's it. You're cutting me out like I'm nothing. Like I didn't raise you. You sold my home? Over a birthday dinner?" She didn't say she was sorry. Didn't mention the lies. The dog party. The years of manipulating me into footing the bill for their lives while mine was quietly shrinking in the background. No, to her, I had just committed the betrayal. The unthinkable. I'd chosen myself. That was the part she couldn't forgive. I let that voicemail sit unanswered, just like all the others. But I wasn't done yet. I filed paperwork to separate every legal tie I had to them. No more co-signed accounts. No more shared plans. I even changed the beneficiary on my life insurance, something I hadn't thought about until I looked and realized it still had Owen listed in case of emergency. I donated the car I'd taken back from him. Not sold, donated. He'd already trashed the interior anyway. I switched phone numbers. New SIM, new carrier. I gave my new number to 3 people, my best friend, my boss, and my therapist. And then I moved. Not far. Just enough. New address. New building with a security gate. No access unless you're buzzed in. I didn't post about it. Didn't announce it. I just disappeared from their reach. They didn't take it well. My cousin Tasha tried to post a series of Instagram stories about toxic family members who forget where they came from, clearly aimed at me. One photo showed her holding a crying Nibbles with the caption, "He doesn't understand why Uncle Nate doesn't love him anymore." I almost laughed. Owen took it further. He tracked down a mutual friend and tried to ask them to pass me a message. The friend refused. Told him flat out, "He doesn't owe you anything." My mom, though, she didn't fight publicly. She started sending letters again. Once a week. Handwritten. Always with the same tone. Not quite apologies, more like rehearsed sympathy. She'd start soft, then veer into gaslighting. "I never meant to hurt you, but you were always sensitive." Or, "I just wish you remembered everything I did for you." Sometimes she'd include photos. Old ones. Me and Owen as kids. Me and her at graduation. Always smiling. Frozen moments used as proof of love. I burned the first letter. I threw away the second. By the 5th, I stopped opening them altogether. And then, silence. No letters. No calls. No attempts. For the first time in my adult life, I experienced what it was like to breathe without guilt sitting on my chest. I started going to the gym again. I began writing, something I hadn't done in years. I volunteered at a nonprofit that helps young adults age out of the foster system. They were stunned by how easily I managed finances and spreadsheets. I didn't tell them why I was so good at budgeting and stretching resources. It didn't matter anymore. It took 3 months before I saw one of them in public. Owen. He was standing outside a strip mall, talking to someone loudly on the phone. He looked thinner, older. His shoes were scuffed. His energy was brittle. I was about to turn away when he saw me. For a second, he just stared. Then he walked toward me. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just tired. "Hey," he said. I said nothing. He looked down. "You're really gone, huh?" Still, I didn't speak. He stopped himself. "Forget it." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "You know, Mom still checks the mailbox. Hopes one of those envelopes will have something from you." I looked at him then. Really looked. And said the last words I would ever say to any of them. She already got everything I had to give. He didn't respond. Just nodded once and walked away. And that was the end. There was no grand reconciliation. No dramatic courtroom scene. No apology that suddenly made everything worth forgiving. Just me, finally free. The last birthday I spent with them, I sat alone in a restaurant, humiliated and invisible. The first birthday I spent without them, I sat in my new apartment, ordered my favorite takeout, and got 3 video calls from people who actually cared. No guilt. No performance. Just peace. And as I closed my laptop, I realized. Walking away wasn't the hard part. It was admitting that I should have done it a long, long time ago. I was 28 when I realized my family didn't really see me, not as a person, anyway. To them, I was the quiet cousin who never quite made it. The one who drove the same beat-up Civic since college. The one who didn't brag at family dinners or flash new watches like my cousin Blake did. My name's Daniel, and I learned early on that in my family, perception meant everything. You could be drowning in debt, but if you wore a suit and said the right buzzwords, they'd treat you like royalty. Blake mastered that game. Blake was my Aunt Sandra's pride and joy, her perfect son. You couldn't spend 5 minutes around her without hearing about his latest big move. Blake just got a new position at a top firm in the city. She'd beam across the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And Daniel," she'd add, "how's that little tech thing you're doing?" The tech thing she was referring to was my company, a startup I'd built from scratch with 2 college friends. We'd stayed quiet about it. working long hours, reinvesting every cent. I didn't need to prove anything to them, so I never bothered to correct her. But Blake, he lived for the show. He'd lean back in his chair, loosen his tie, and smirk at me. "Hey, Danny boy," he'd say, clinking his glass. "Still fixing computers for people? Maybe someday you'll have a real job like me." It wasn't just once or twice. It was every family gathering, every birthday, every Thanksgiving. His mom would laugh like it was the funniest thing in the world, while mine would just shift uncomfortably and whisper, "Just ignore it, honey." Ignoring it got harder each year. The comments grew sharper as Blake's ego inflated. He'd brag about his luxury apartment that was really just a one-bedroom rental, his six-figure salary that somehow didn't stop him from constantly asking for money from his mom, and his networking events that looked suspiciously like nightclub selfies. He had the charm, the look, the confidence, and he weaponized all of it. I'll admit it, there were nights I'd go home from those dinners furious, replaying every smug line in my head. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't need their approval. What they didn't know was that my company had grown faster than any of us expected. We'd landed a few big clients, reinvested in infrastructure, and within a few years, I became the majority shareholder. But I didn't post about it, didn't tell anyone in the family. I lived simply, drove my same old car, and wore hoodies to work. Maybe part of me liked the peace that came from being underestimated. That peace ended last Thanksgiving. My parents had offered to host the family dinner that year, a full house, filled with the usual chaos. My mom loved playing hostess, but she always dreaded Sandra's arrival. "I just can't take another evening of her showing off," she whispered while setting the table. She even called last week to ask if we were using real silverware this time. I laughed, but deep down, I knew what was coming. They arrived right on time. Blake in his shiny Mercedes, blaring music loud enough to rattle the windows, and Sandra stepping out in a fur coat like she was entering a movie premiere. "We brought the wine," she announced before even knocking. She didn't hand it to my mom, though. She passed it directly to my dad, like she didn't trust my mother not to drop it. Blake followed, sunglasses still on indoors. "Sup, fam?" he said, grinning wide. Then he spotted me across the room and grinned even wider. "Daniel, my man, still driving that junk car, huh?" He laughed, shaking my hand like he was doing me a favor. "Yeah," I said with a calm smile. "Still gets me where I need to go." "Respect," he chuckled. "Not everyone can be allergic to success." His mom laughed way too hard. My dad gave me a look. The same look he always gave me when he wanted me to keep my cool. I did. Barely. Dinner was as chaotic as usual. Sandra took every chance to brag about Blake's career in finance, though she never seemed to know what he actually did. "He's just such a go-getter," she'd gush. I told him he could do anything he set his mind to. Blake grinned and raised his glass. "Except maybe live on ramen noodles like Danny here, right?" Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I focused on my food, trying not to show how much it got to me. But Blake didn't stop. He told story after story about his important clients, his corporate meetings, his promotion that's just around the corner. It was a performance, and the whole family was his audience. Then, between bites of turkey, he leaned toward me and said, "Hey, random question. Your little company doesn't happen to be hiring, does it? I've been applying to some startups lately. Heard the market's hot." Something in me stirred. I tilted my head. "Oh, you're looking to leave finance." He shrugged. "Yeah, man. Corporate life's too restrictive. I want something dynamic, something innovative, you know? Something like what you do, coding and stuff." I bit back a laugh. "Coding and stuff. What kind of role are you looking for?" I asked. He smirked. "Anything that pays well. I mean, I wouldn't mind a senior position, maybe something managerial. I've got people skills, leadership qualities, all that." Sandra chimed in. "He's a natural, Daniel. You'd be lucky to have him. Maybe you could put in a word with your boss." I didn't respond right away. I just smiled, feeling my pulse quicken. For the first time, I realized he had no idea. He didn't know who he was talking to, and I wasn't about to tell him, not yet. "I'll see what I can do," I said quietly. He grinned, satisfied, and changed the topic to his new watch. The night went on like that, bragging, laughing, little jabs disguised as jokes. I stayed quiet, but my mind was racing. It wasn't anger this time, it was anticipation. Because just a few days earlier, my company's HR team had forwarded me a resume. A name I recognized instantly, Blake Harrison. The same Blake who'd mocked me for years, who'd said I'd never make it. He'd applied to one of our open positions, a mid-level analyst role. Not managerial, not senior, just average. I hadn't said a word when I saw it. I didn't reject it either. I told HR to hold on to it, just in case. And now, sitting across from him, hearing him brag about his bright future, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. The next morning, I printed his application, his resume, his cover letter, even his awkwardly written, "Why I'd be a great fit" paragraph. I slipped it into a folder and tucked it away in my briefcase. I didn't plan to bring it up right away. I wanted the timing to be perfect, the kind of moment that would make him remember every smug comment he'd ever made. 2 weeks later, I got a text from my mom. "Don't forget, Christmas dinner's at Aunt Sandra's this year." I smiled. Perfect. Because this time, the show would be mine. And Blake? He had no idea the curtain was about to rise. 2 weeks later, Christmas arrived, and with it came the same mix of dread and forced cheer that had hung over every holiday since I was old enough to notice the family hierarchy. I drove my old Civic through the freezing rain to Aunt Sandra's house, headlights reflecting off her over-decorated front yard. Inflatable reindeer, blinking lights, and a massive banner that read, "Welcome to the Harrison Holiday Spectacular." She'd really outdone herself this year. It wasn't about Christmas to her. It was about presentation, about proving, yet again, that her family was the standard everyone else should aspire to. I parked on the street behind Blake's Mercedes. It looked freshly washed despite the weather, gleaming like a trophy. He even had the nerve to park it diagonally, taking up 2 spots, because of course he did. When I stepped inside, I was hit by the smell of cinnamon candles and overcooked ham. Sandra appeared almost instantly, all smiles and perfume. "Daniel, so good to see you," she exclaimed, though her hug was more of a quick shoulder tap. "You made it on time this year. That's progress." I forced a smile. "Yeah, wouldn't miss it." "Oh, Blake's in the living room showing everyone his new watch collection," she said, gesturing grandly toward the noise. "And please, do take your shoes off. We just had the floors redone. Imported oak, not laminate." "Right. Wouldn't want my shoes to offend the imported wood." I stepped into the living room and found the whole extended family gathered around Blake like he was hosting a TED Talk. He stood by the fireplace, wearing a turtleneck and blazer, gesturing with a champagne flute as he talked about investment strategies. The room erupted in laughter every few minutes, not because he was funny, but because they all knew who held Sandra's favor. "Daniel," Blake called, spotting me. "Finally. Thought you'd gotten lost again. Or maybe the Civic didn't start." A few people chuckled politely. I smiled faintly. "Still runs fine." He grinned. "Good to hear. Reliable cars are, what's the word? Economical." "Yeah, very on-brand for you." I could feel the backhanded tone dripping from his voice. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was studying him, watching how he performed, how everyone around him clung to his every word. The arrogance, the entitlement, it had grown even worse since Thanksgiving. Dinner was a performance. Sandra sat at the head of the table like a queen, with Blake on her right side. Of course. I was squeezed between 2 younger cousins who barely looked up from their phones. Conversation circled endlessly around Blake, his new project, his clients, his leadership. Every time someone else spoke, Sandra would find a way to redirect it back to him. "Oh, Daniel, you're still running that little computer business, right?" she asked suddenly, her tone sweet but condescending. "Yeah," I said evenly. "Still going strong." "That's nice," she said, smiling. "Blake was just saying he's considering getting into tech. Isn't that funny? Maybe you could show him the ropes." Blake laughed, cutting in. "I actually applied to a few startups last month. Real companies, though, not the kind you run out of your garage." Sandra burst out laughing. "Oh, Blake, you're terrible." The table joined in. My mom frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Daniel's done well for himself," she said softly. "You'd be surprised." Sandra waved a hand. "Oh, I'm sure he has, dear. We all have our little hobbies." I glanced at my dad, who gave me that quiet, warning look again. The one that said, "Let it go." I did. For now. After dinner, Blake cornered me near the fireplace, holding another glass of champagne. "So, Danny boy," he said with a grin. "Any luck with that job hookup we talked about?" I tilted my head. "Oh, you mean your application?" He blinked, confused. "You saw it?" I did. His grin widened. Nice. So, can you get me in? HR hasn't called me yet, but I figured you could put in a word. I'd be perfect for something high level. Something that pays at least 6 figures. I've got too much experience for entry-level stuff. I wanted to laugh. His experience consisted of 2 short stints at firms where his mom's connections got him in the door, both of which he left within a year. But I kept my voice calm. I'll see what I can do, I said again. He patted my shoulder. Good man. You know, maybe this will finally get you out of that little tech hole. I could teach you a thing or two about business. Sure, I said quietly. He smiled like he'd just done me a favor. The next few weeks were uneventful, at least on the surface. I focused on work, on a new contract negotiation that could double our company's revenue. Meanwhile, I heard through my mom that Sandra was telling everyone Blake was helping Daniel's company expand. I nearly choked on my coffee when she said that. Helping? I asked, laughing. That's what she told Aunt Carol, my mom's side. She said you're lucky to have someone like Blake mentoring you. I almost couldn't believe it. The delusion was impressive. Then came the final straw, the phone call that made my patience evaporate. It was a Wednesday night when my phone buzzed. The caller ID said, Aunt Sandra. Against my better judgment, I answered. Daniel, she said, cheerful as ever. Just wanted to check in on that little job situation for Blake. He's been waiting, poor thing. It's been weeks. I leaned back in my chair. Yeah, I know. We've been reviewing applicants carefully. Well, can't you speed things up? She said sharply. Blake is highly qualified. He doesn't deserve to be kept waiting behind all those. What do you call them? Coders. I raised an eyebrow. We evaluate everyone equally. No exceptions. Her tone shifted from polite to irritated. Oh, don't be difficult, Daniel. You've always been such a nice boy. I'm sure your boss would appreciate your input. Blake's family, after all. I smiled faintly to myself. I'll make sure your message is passed along. Good, she said curtly. And maybe remind them that Blake comes from a reputable family. Some of us have standards. When she hung up, I sat there for a moment in stunned silence. Standards. The word echoed in my head, bitter and hollow. They still thought I was just some low-level employee, someone they could push around, someone who'd beg for approval. 2 days later, Blake called me directly. Hey man, he said, just checking in about that position. Any updates? Not yet, I said. He sighed dramatically. Man, it's been rough. Bills are piling up. I even told Mom maybe she could talk to your boss. You know, vouch for me or something. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice steady. I heard. I mean, you've got to have some influence, he continued. Even if you're not management or whatever, they must like you, right? Something about the way he said it, the casual arrogance, the assumption that I was beneath him, made my chest tighten. I'd endured this for years. The jokes, the dismissive tone, the fake pity disguised as humor. But this time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt ready. A week later, I received a calendar invite from HR. Applicant review, Blake Harrison. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. But before I made any decisions, I wanted to see how far their entitlement would stretch. So when Sandra called again that weekend, I let her talk. She went on and on about how Blake was too good for most companies, how lesser people always got lucky breaks, how real talent, like Blake's, often went unnoticed. Then she said something that made my jaw tighten. You know, Daniel, you could really learn a thing or two from Blake. He's ambitious, charismatic, confident, all the things you never were. Maybe if you'd followed his example, you'd be somewhere by now. I didn't even respond. I just said, thanks for the advice, and hung up. After that, I didn't call. I didn't text. I just waited. Because there was a family dinner planned for mid-January, another one of Sandra's casual get-togethers. She'd invited everyone again, including me. And she'd told my mom, quite proudly, Blake might have some big news to share soon. Fingers crossed about that company Daniel works for. I smiled when my mom told me, because by that point, the decision had already been made. Blake's application had been reviewed, evaluated, processed, and stamped rejected by me. Not out of spite. Not yet. But because, frankly, he didn't qualify. No skills. No experience. Just empty confidence. Still, I printed out the full application, every page, every word. I tucked it neatly into my briefcase. And when Sandra's dinner invitation came through, I accepted instantly. That night, as I ironed my shirt and prepared to drive over, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the quiet cousin. I didn't feel small or overlooked. I felt calm, controlled, because the game was finally about to change. And Blake, the perfect son, the family's golden boy, was about to learn exactly who he'd been talking down to all these years. The day of Aunt Sandra's January dinner started like any other: gray skies, icy wind, and that heavy stillness that always seems to hang before something important happens. I remember standing in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting my collar, feeling this strange calm. For once, I wasn't anxious about another round of family theatrics. I knew something they didn't. And that knowledge, that quiet power, was better than any revenge I could have dreamed of back then. Sandra's house looked like a luxury furniture catalog again, down to the strategically placed candles and the overpriced cheese platter on the table. I arrived right on time, though, as always, she acted like I was late. "Daniel, we were starting to think you'd changed your mind," she said, plastering on her signature fake smile. "Nope," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." Blake appeared behind her, wearing yet another turtleneck blazer combo. "Danny boy, back again, huh? Good to see you still hanging in there." "Still here," I replied. He grinned. "Good man. Hey, guess what? Might have some good news tonight." "Oh yeah." He smirked. "Let's just say your company's smarter than I thought." I raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" "Yep. Heard through the grapevine that they're considering me for an interview." "I guess my resume stood out," he said with a wink. My stomach tightened, not from surprise, but from the sheer audacity of it. He'd invented the entire thing, a fantasy to keep feeding his ego, and probably his mother's pride too. I realized then just how far the delusion had gone. Dinner was a blur of forced laughter and wine refills. Sandra was in her element, holding court at the head of the table. Every compliment, every story, somehow circled back to Blake. If anyone mentioned another relative, Sandra found a way to pivot the conversation. "Oh, Carol's daughter got promoted," she'd say. "That's nice, but Blake's actually being recruited by some tech firm right now. Really exclusive, too." I stared at my plate, cutting my roast mechanically. The words "some tech firm" echoed in my head, and I could feel the heat rising under my skin. My mom tried to steer the conversation toward neutral ground. "Daniel's been busy too," she said softly. "His company's doing really well." Sandra waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that's nice, dear. But you know how it is with those little startups. So unstable. I keep telling Blake, he needs something long-term, respectable. I mean, not everyone's built for leadership, right?" I looked up then, straight into her eyes. "Guess not," I said, my tone calm but pointed. Blake chuckled like I'd just told a joke. "Hey, mom's right though," he said, swirling his wine. "It's not easy making it in real business. I mean, it's cute that you've stuck with your thing, Daniel, but honestly, you should have joined a proper firm years ago. You'd probably have a decent car by now." My dad coughed softly, my mom shifted uncomfortably. But Blake kept going, oblivious. "I mean, if this interview goes well," he continued, "I could probably put in a good word for you too. You know, return the favor." The entire table went silent. For a brief moment, no one breathed. Then Sandra laughed loudly, breaking the tension. "Oh, Blake, you're just like your father, always looking out for everyone else." I smiled slowly. "That's generous of you, Blake. Really, but I think I'll manage." He smirked. "Sure, man. Hey, maybe you could help me prep, though? You know, for the technical stuff. I mean, I'm more of a people person, but I figure it's good to understand the nerd side too." That was it. The moment something shifted inside me. I'd endured years of this. The mockery, the arrogance, the way he'd twist everything I did into a punchline. But now, watching him boast about an interview that didn't exist, pretending superiority he hadn't earned, I felt something deeper than anger. It was disappointment, disgust, and, strangely, a sort of clarity. Because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about how much they believed his act, how little they'd ever believed in me. After dinner, I went out to the porch to get some air. The night was cold, breath turning to fog. My mom joined me quietly a few minutes later. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," I said, staring at the streetlight. "Just needed some air." She sighed. "I know how they are, honey. They've always been like this. Your aunt. She just needs to feel like her son's doing better than everyone else." "Yeah," I murmured. "And she's good at making sure everyone believes it." Mom hesitated, then said, "You know, when you first started your company, she told everyone you were wasting your degree. Said you'd burn out in a year." I shouldn't have told you that, but I think you deserve to know. I nodded slowly. Yeah, that sounds like her. She doesn't understand what you've built, Daniel, Mom said. But I do. And your father does too. We're proud of you. I smiled faintly. Thanks, Mom. Then she added something that stopped me cold. You know, she asked your father last week if he'd lend Blake some money? Said he was in between opportunities and needed a little help to stay on his feet. I blinked. Wait, what? Mom nodded. He said no, of course. But she got offended. Said we were turning our backs on family. So Blake wasn't just jobless. He was broke. And instead of owning it, he'd spun a whole story about getting hired, using my company as the backdrop to make himself look important. The betrayal wasn't just his, it was theirs. The way my own relatives had been so quick to believe the golden boy over me, to dismiss me for years, only to suddenly claim me when it suited their story. When we went back inside, the energy had shifted. Blake and Sandra were standing near the fireplace, talking to my dad. Or rather, talking at him. Come on, Uncle Tom, Blake was saying. You know how hard it is out there. Just a small loan. Mom said you helped Daniel get started once. My dad's voice was calm, but firm. We didn't help Daniel. He worked for everything he has. Sandra rolled her eyes. Oh, please, Tom. It's family. You have to help each other. You wouldn't even miss it. I stepped forward. What's going on? Sandra turned toward me, clearly irritated. Nothing you need to worry about, dear. Just grown-up matters. Really? I said, my voice steady. Because it sounds like you're asking my parents for money. Her expression tightened. Watch your tone, Daniel. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it kind of does, I said. Since Blake seems to be using my name in his stories again. Blake frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I took a step closer. You told everyone you're getting an interview with my company. You're not. Sandra's face went pale. Excuse me. Your son applied? I said evenly. I saw the application myself. He didn't make it past screening. Blake's face flushed deep red. That's not true. I looked him dead in the eyes. It is. And you might want to stop lying to everyone before you dig the hole deeper. The room went dead silent. You could have heard the clock ticking. Sandra's lips trembled as she turned toward me. How dare you embarrass my son in front of everyone? I'm not embarrassing him, I said quietly. He did that himself. Blake's hands clenched. You think you're better than me? Because you run some dinky company with your college buddies? No, I said. I think I'm honest about where I stand. He scoffed. You've always been jealous. Always. Ever since we were kids. You couldn't handle that I was the favorite. I almost laughed. You're right, I said. I couldn't handle it. But not for the reason you think. Sandra was livid now. You're disrespectful, Daniel. I knew your parents spoiled you. I can't believe the nerve. I raised a hand, calm but firm. You know what's funny? After all these years of you talking down to me, you still have no idea who I am. No idea what I've built. You only see what you want to see. Sandra's jaw tightened. And what's that supposed to mean? I looked at her, then at Blake. My hand brushed against the briefcase by my chair. Inside it was the folder, the one with Blake's rejected application. His cover letter. His signature. His lie printed in black and white. I could have pulled it out right then and there, but something in me said wait. Not yet. Not until the moment was perfect. Instead, I simply smiled and said, you'll find out soon enough. And then I turned to leave, feeling their eyes burning holes into my back. Because in that instant, that electric silence filled with shock and tension, I realized something had finally snapped. The illusion had cracked. The mask had slipped. And when it broke completely, I was going to make sure they never forgot what it revealed. The following week felt heavier than any I could remember. Even though I'd kept my composure at that dinner, the fallout hit hard. My mom called the next morning, her voice soft, hesitant. Daniel, your aunt's been calling nonstop. She's furious. Says you humiliated Blake. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the half-packed briefcase by my feet. I didn't humiliate him, Mom. I told the truth. I know, she said quickly. I know you did. But you know how she is. She's telling everyone you're arrogant now, that you've changed. I laughed bitterly. Changed? You mean I finally stopped letting them talk down to me? Mom sighed. She said some things I didn't like hearing. About us. About you. Let me guess. How you raised me to be disrespectful. There was a pause. Something like that. I rubbed my temples, the weight of years pressing down. It wasn't just that Sandra was angry. It was that she'd gone into full self-defense mode. Her entire social image depended on the myth of her perfect son. For me to expose even a piece of that truth, that wasn't something she'd forgive. And she didn't. Over the next few days, the gossip started. Small things at first. An aunt who accidentally forwarded me a text thread about how I'd lashed out at dinner. A cousin who posted a cryptic Facebook status about family members forgetting their place. It was ridiculous, childish, but effective. By the end of the week, half the family had decided I'd gone off the rails. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Blake. You really couldn't just keep your mouth shut, could you? No greeting. No explanation. Just that. I stared at my phone, debating whether to respond. But then another text came through. You think you're better than everyone because you lucked out with some startup money? Newsflash, everyone knows it's going to crash like all the others. I didn't reply. There was no point. But the words still stuck in my head. Lucked out. As if the years of work, the sleepless nights, the near-bankrupt phase, none of it counted. To him, success wasn't earned. It was something that happened to people like me. 2 days later, I got an email that made my blood run cold. It was from one of my HR managers, subject line, issue with internal confidentiality. When I opened it, my heart sank. Attached was a screenshot of an email sent from an anonymous account, but one that contained company details only employees or close associates could know. It accused me of nepotism for supposedly trying to hire an unqualified family member, and even suggested that I'd been biased in reviewing candidates. The accusation was absurd, but the phrasing was familiar. I stared at the screen, rereading one line in particular. It's concerning that someone in your leadership would risk the company's reputation over personal favoritism. That word, favoritism, was Sandra's favorite insult whenever she didn't get her way. I could almost hear her saying it. I called HR immediately, explained the situation, and forwarded Blake's actual application with timestamps, notes, and rejection details. They understood, but still, it felt humiliating. After the call ended, I just sat there for a long while, staring at the rain outside my office window. My company had always been my sanctuary, the one place where I didn't have to prove myself to anyone. Now, even that was tainted by the drama I tried so hard to leave behind. That night, my dad called. Your mom's worried, he said quietly. Sandra's been stirring things up with everyone, saying you abused your position, that you're petty. I let out a hollow laugh. Petty would have been printing his rejection letter and handing it to him at dinner. There was silence on the line. You didn't, right? He asked, cautious. Not yet. He sighed. Son, I know they've treated you unfairly. Believe me, I know. But don't let them drag you down to their level. You've worked too hard for that. I'm not planning revenge, I said softly. Not yet, anyway. I need to step back. Let things settle. He paused, then said, sometimes walking away is the loudest thing you can do. After that, I decided to disappear for a while. Not literally, but emotionally. I stopped responding to family messages, muted the group chats, ignored the gossip. I focused on work. For the next month, I poured everything into my company. New partnerships, system overhauls, expansion plans. The busier I got, the less time I had to think about them. But silence has a funny way of making people uneasy. By late February, the texts started trickling in again. First from cousins, little feelers like, hey man, what happened with Aunt Sandra? She's been acting weird. Then from my mother, who said Sandra had shown up at her door unannounced, claiming I'd destroyed her son's future. Apparently, Blake hadn't taken his rejection well. He'd told everyone that I'd personally sabotaged his career, that I'd blacklisted him in the industry out of jealousy. It was almost impressive how fast the narrative flipped. One week, I was the quiet disappointment. The next, I was the villain in his story. And yet, I didn't fight it. I could have sent proof to everyone. I could have exposed Blake's lies immediately, the false rumors, the staged stories, the desperation behind his facade. But I didn't, because deep down, I realized I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The truth didn't require an audience. Still, that didn't mean it didn't hurt. There were nights I lay awake replaying everything. The dinners, the laughter, the smug comments, the years of swallowing my pride while they painted me as the underachiever. It wasn't even about Blake anymore. It was about how my family had always measured worth by noise. Whoever shouted the loudest, bragged the most, demanded attention. That's who they believed in. And I'd spent years whispering. One evening, I went for a drive. No destination, just the hum of the engine and the open road. I passed by Sandra's neighborhood, the one I used to visit every Sunday as a kid. I remembered the barbecues, the pool parties, the way she'd always compare Blake's milestones to mine. "Blake got an A in math again," she'd announce. "Daniel, how did you do?" I'd laugh it off back then, pretend it didn't sting. But standing there now, parked across from that same polished house, I realized how long I'd carried the weight of those comparisons. The truth hit me like cold water. No amount of success would ever earn her respect. Not because I hadn't achieved enough, but because, to her, I wasn't hers. I wasn't the child she'd built her identity around. My success didn't validate her, it threatened her narrative. The next morning, I sat in my office early, coffee in hand, and pulled up the company hiring dashboard. Out of curiosity, I checked the status of recent applicants, including Blake's. There it was, clear as day, rejected, timestamped, logged, and reviewed by 3 separate hiring managers. I stared at it for a while. Then I clicked download application. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just resolved. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, fine. Maybe I'd start acting like one, not out of spite, but out of justice. Quiet, deliberate justice. Over the next few weeks, I focused on tightening everything around me. I updated compliance systems, reviewed internal processes, and, for the first time, began preparing public investor statements. Our company was about to go through something big, something I hadn't told anyone yet. We were merging with a larger tech firm, and when the deal went through, it would officially make me the majority owner of a company valued in the tens of millions. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Blake was out there telling people I'd ruined him, I was sitting in meetings that would change my entire financial trajectory. But still, it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew I hadn't gotten closure. Not the kind that comes from shouting, but the kind that comes from silence and clarity. So I did the only thing that ever really worked for me. I waited. I worked in silence. Let them talk. Let them gossip. Let the story twist itself into knots. Because one day soon, the truth was going to walk right through the front door on its own. And when that day came, I wouldn't have to raise my voice. All I'd have to do was show up. By March, everything had shifted. The company that started in my college dorm room, the one Aunt Sandra used to call my little computer hobby, was no longer little and definitely not a hobby. Our merger went through after months of quiet negotiations. Overnight, our valuation doubled, and I found myself sitting in a boardroom with executives who used to look right past me now waiting for my approval before they spoke. It was surreal. A few years ago, I was eating instant noodles and patching together code at 2 in the morning, praying our servers wouldn't crash. Now, I was signing contracts worth more money than my entire family had ever seen combined. But success doesn't hit all at once. It seeps in. The first thing I noticed was how much quieter my mind had become. I wasn't thinking about Blake or my aunt or the constant need to prove myself. My days were filled with work that mattered. Clients who respected me. Employees who didn't care what car I drove or what last name I had. They just cared that I led well. That kind of respect is addictive. My mornings became structured, my focus sharper. I'd get to the office early, before anyone else, and just sit by the big window overlooking the city skyline, drinking my coffee. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. One morning, my partner and co-founder, Ryan, leaned against my office door. "You realize we're officially listed on Forbes' top 100 startups to watch now, right?" I looked up, blinking. "Seriously?" "Yeah," he said, grinning. Page 42. Right between 2 companies that raised twice our funding. Not bad for a garage project, huh? We both laughed. Later that week, we got the official offer from the merged firm's board. They wanted me to stay on as CEO. It wasn't just a title, it was trust, recognition. Proof that all the late nights, the setbacks, the doubt, it all added up to something. But even then, part of me stayed quiet about it. Not because I didn't want to share it, but because I'd learned that real satisfaction doesn't come from telling everyone what you've achieved. It comes from knowing you don't need to. Still, word travels fast, especially in families that thrive on gossip. My mom was the first to mention it. She called one evening, her voice trembling with something between pride and disbelief. "Honey, did you know your name is in the news?" "Yeah," I said, trying not to laugh. I figured someone would notice eventually. "Well," she said carefully, "your aunt noticed too." Of course she did. Apparently, Sandra had seen the article online and immediately called my mom, pretending to be so proud and so happy for me. My mom said she sounded like she was forcing every word through gritted teeth. Then she asked the inevitable question, "So, how much is he worth now?" Classic Sandra. I just shook my head when Mom told me. "Let her wonder," I said. But it wasn't long before Blake found out too. He sent me a text out of nowhere, his first in weeks. "Congrats on the merger, man. Must be nice." Short, polite. "Hello." I didn't respond. A day later, another message came through. "Hey, I was wondering if we could grab lunch sometime. Just to talk. No hard feelings." No hard feelings. That was rich. I left that one unanswered too. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because I finally realized something crucial. I didn't know him closure. For years, I'd been the one reaching for peace, trying to smooth things over while he twisted every interaction into a power play. But now, I didn't need to play anymore. Instead, I kept building. By April, we'd opened 2 new offices, one in Chicago, one in Austin. We hired 40 new employees in a month. Our product line expanded, and major investors were calling us. I started flying out for conferences, sitting on panels next to people I used to idolize. It was strange how easily confidence replaced resentment. The higher I climbed, the smaller their words felt. Every memory of being mocked, dismissed, underestimated. It all started fading into the background noise of the past. But as I moved forward, my family seemed stuck in the same loop. At Easter dinner, when I hadn't planned on attending, my mom convinced me to come, saying, "It might be good to show your face. You've been working nonstop." So I went. When I walked in, I could feel every pair of eyes on me. My aunt's house looked as pristine as ever, but her expression faltered when she saw me. She smiled too widely. "Daniel, look who decided to join us." I nodded politely. "Aunt Sandra." She ushered me in like nothing had ever happened. "We were just talking about your company. Blake says it's really growing. We're so proud of you." I almost laughed. Proud. Blake was sitting at the far end of the table, looking smaller than I remembered. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with something that almost looked like uncertainty. Dinner was civil, too civil. Every compliment felt rehearsed, every smile strained. Sandra kept hinting that Blake was exploring new opportunities, but it was clear he was struggling. His fancy job offers had dried up, and his mother's facade was cracking. At one point, she turned to me and said, "You know, Daniel, Blake's been looking for a fresh start. Maybe your company could use someone like him? He's such a natural leader." The table fell silent. I set down my fork, met her gaze, and said evenly, "We're not hiring for leadership roles right now." Her smile tightened. "Oh, come now. I'm sure you could make room for family." "I don't make exceptions," I said. "Especially not for family." Her eyes flickered, a flash of anger behind her polished expression. Blake shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. My dad coughed softly, breaking the tension. "Pass the potatoes," he said, pretending to smooth things over. But everyone at the table knew what had just happened. The old me would have felt guilty, maybe even apologized just to keep the peace. But not this time. I wasn't cruel. I was simply done bending. After dinner, my mom pulled me aside. "That was tense," she said carefully. "Yeah," I replied. "But necessary." She smiled faintly. "You sounded like your father just now." That night, I drove home with the windows down, the cool air hitting my face. For once, I didn't feel angry or defensive. I felt free. It was strange how power didn't change who I was. It just revealed who they really were. In the weeks that followed, things only got better. The merger opened more doors than I'd imagined. I started getting invited to speak at business schools, podcasts, even a local news feature about self-made entrepreneurs. My name, my company, my story, it was everywhere. But behind the success, something deeper was growing too: perspective. I realized that revenge didn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, it's just living well while the people who doubted you are forced to watch. Still, I knew this story wasn't over. Sandra's pride wouldn't let it end quietly. The cracks were showing. Her whispers, the sudden family brunches she tried to host again, her attempts to rewrite the narrative by saying she'd always believed in me. It was almost funny, watching her try to twist history. And Blake? Well, he was still out there somewhere, trying to find his next big break. But our paths were about to cross again, soon, and in a way neither of them would ever forget. Because there was another family gathering on the horizon. A big one. And this time, I wasn't just showing up as Daniel. the quiet cousin they underestimated. I'd be walking in as Daniel, the man who owned the very company Blake had built his lies around. And when that truth came to light, I wouldn't need to say a word. They'd see it in my smile. By the time summer rolled around, I'd almost forgotten about the chaos from earlier that year. Almost. But then my mother called one evening, her voice bubbling with that uneasy tone I'd come to recognize over the years. "Daniel," she said, "Sandra's hosting another family dinner next weekend. She says it's to celebrate Blake's new opportunity." I leaned back in my chair, smirking. New opportunity? What? Did he get a real job this time? "She didn't say," my mom replied. "But she made sure to invite everyone, including you." That got my attention. Sandra didn't invite me out of kindness. If she was reaching out, it was for one of two reasons: image control or desperation. Maybe both. "Did you say I'm coming?" I asked. "I said you'd think about it," she said carefully. "But maybe you should, just to show them you're doing okay." I laughed softly. "Oh, Mom, I'm doing better than okay." For a few days, I debated it. Part of me didn't want to go. Why walk into another one of her pageants? But another part of me, the part that had spent years being dismissed, whispered something else. It's time. So, I accepted the invitation. The night of the dinner, I arrived late on purpose. The house was glowing with warm light, laughter spilling through the open windows. From outside, I could already hear Sandra's voice carrying over the crowd. High, cheerful, performative. When I walked in, everything stopped for a moment. People turned, surprised. Sandra recovered first. "Daniel," she said with mock excitement. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said smoothly. The living room was full, relatives I hadn't seen in months, glasses of champagne, the usual curated display of wealth. Blake was near the center, dressed in a sharp navy suit, chatting animatedly. When he saw me, that familiar smirk spread across his face. "Danny boy," he said, crossing the room. "Look who decided to crawl out of his office." "Blake," I greeted, matching his grin. "Heard you've got big news." He chuckled, straightening his tie. "Yeah, actually, things are turning around. Finally got an interview with a major firm. Tech company, big one. Cutting-edge stuff." "Oh," I asked casually. "Which one?" He smiled coyly. "Don't want to jinx it yet, but let's just say it's your world. I've got connections now. They said I'm a top candidate." Sandra, overhearing, swooped in with her trademark flair. "We're all so proud," she announced to everyone nearby. "Blake's been working so hard, and now he's being considered for an executive position. Isn't that wonderful?" The crowd murmured approvingly. I just smiled, sipping my drink. "That's great," I said calmly. "Do you know who's interviewing you?" Blake shrugged. "Some board members, I think. The email mentioned a few names." "Oh, and apparently the CEO will be there too. Big deal, right?" "Very," I said, setting my glass down. "Make sure to prepare well." He grinned. "Already ahead of you." I nodded. "Good. You'll need it." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" But before I could answer, Sandra clinked her glass. "Everyone, dinner's ready." I took my seat across from them, calm, composed. The food was perfect, as always, but I barely tasted it. I just waited, quietly, as they bragged. Sandra went on about Blake's bright future. Blake tossed in lines about leadership potential, and the rest of the table nodded approvingly. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. "Daniel," he said softly, "how's your company been?" Sandra smirked. "Oh yes, tell us. The little project's still running, right?" I looked up slowly, meeting her eyes. "It's doing all right. We finished the merger a few months ago. Revenue's up. We just expanded to 3 new states." A few relatives perked up. "Wow," one of them said. "That's impressive." Sandra's smile faltered, just slightly. "Oh, that's nice, dear." Blake laughed under his breath. 3 states, huh? Not bad. Maybe if I get this new job, I'll see you around the industry." I smiled faintly. "You just might." The rest of dinner passed in small talk and wine refills. But as the night wound down, Sandra announced, "We should all toast to Blake's success, to new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, but I couldn't help myself. I added, "And to honesty. It always finds a way to catch up, doesn't it?" Sandra blinked, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I set my glass down and reached into my briefcase. Yes, I'd brought it. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out a familiar folder and placed it on the table. Blake's smile disappeared instantly. "What's that?" Sandra asked. "This," I said, sliding the folder toward Blake. Is your son's application to my company? The one he lied about getting an interview for. The room went silent. Every head turned toward Blake. Sandra frowned, flustered. That's ridiculous. He applied to some startup months ago. Not some startup, I said evenly. My company. The color drained from Blake's face. You're the CEO? I nodded. I am. Have been for years. A stunned silence fell. Then Sandra burst out. You're lying. I smiled faintly, pulled out my phone, and opened the company website. My name right there under founder and CEO. I turned it toward her. She stared, jaw trembling. I told HR to keep your application on file, I said to Blake quietly. And when you started telling everyone you were getting hired, I decided to hold on to it. Figured this moment might come. Blake's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sandra's face turned crimson. You mean to tell me, she hissed, you knew this whole time and you stayed quiet? I finished. Yes. I figured you'd reveal yourselves eventually. You always do. She slammed her napkin down. How dare you embarrass us like this? I tilted my head. Embarrass you? I didn't lie. I didn't brag. I just showed you the truth. Blake muttered something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. His mother's voice rose, sharp and shaky. You think this makes you better than us? I met her gaze calmly. No, it just makes me honest. The table was silent except for the faint clinking of glasses as people looked away, pretending to chew. My mom's eyes were wide but proud. My dad had that look again, the one that said, you handled it right. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and said softly, Blake, I genuinely hope you find something that fits. But if you're ever tempted to lie about working with me again, at least make sure the person you're bragging to isn't me. And with that, I turned to leave. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just the sound of my footsteps fading toward the door. Behind me, I heard Sandra's voice cracking, Blake muttering, and the quiet whispers spreading around the table. Outside, the summer air felt warm and light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small when I walked away from that house. I felt whole. Because revenge didn't come from tearing them down. It came from standing tall enough that their words couldn't reach me anymore. I didn't expect the fallout to be as loud as it was. Word traveled fast, faster than I thought possible. By Monday morning, my mom called, her voice somewhere between shocked and vindicated. Daniel, she said, your aunt's been calling everyone. She's having a meltdown. Apparently, Blake packed up and left after you walked out. I leaned back in my chair at the office, half listening as she continued. She said he stormed off without saying goodbye. And she's blaming you, of course, says you humiliated him. I let out a quiet laugh. She's right. I did. Mom hesitated, then said, but you know what's funny? No one's taking her side this time. Everyone saw how she's treated you for years. They're finally talking about it. That caught me off guard. For the first time in my life, the family wasn't rallying behind her. The golden image had cracked, and when the light hit it, they saw her clearly. By the end of the week, I started getting messages from cousins, the same ones who used to avoid me at gatherings. Man, I can't believe you stayed quiet all those years. Respect. Sandra's losing her mind. Blake's been applying everywhere, but people in the industry talk, you know? You handled that better than any of us would have. Apparently, after the dinner, Sandra tried to do what she always did, twist the story in her favor. She told everyone that I schemed to embarrass Blake, that I'd ruined his chances out of jealousy. But the problem was, this time, people had seen it with their own eyes. The act had finally collapsed under its own weight. One cousin told me that Blake showed up at his place a few days later, suitcase in hand, asking for a place to crash. He looked awful, the cousin said. Said he'd been rejected from 3 interviews already. I didn't have the heart to ask why. I didn't either. A few weeks later, I ran into Blake by pure accident at a small coffee shop downtown. I almost didn't recognize him. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt, eyes sunken, a dullness that hadn't been there before. When he saw me, he froze. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. Daniel. Blake. He shifted awkwardly. Look, about that night. I waited. He sighed. I messed up. Okay. I lied. I was stupid. And you didn't deserve the crap I gave you all those years. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't know, man. You always made it look easy. And I kept failing. I couldn't stand it. For a long moment, I said nothing. The old me might have offered comfort, told him it was fine. But I wasn't that person anymore. You know what's funny? I said finally. You thought I had it easy. But you never saw the years I worked in silence while everyone laughed. He looked down. Yeah, I know that now. I studied him for a moment, then said, I don't hate you, Blake. I never did. I just stopped needing your approval. He nodded slowly, like he wasn't sure what to do with that. Then he left. No handshake. No reconciliation. Just quiet acceptance that something between us had ended, and it wasn't coming back. That night, I got a message from my dad. Proud of you, son. Not just for what you built, but for how you walked away. It hit harder than I expected. Months passed. I focused on work, but things felt lighter now. Family gatherings were smaller, quieter. Sandra stopped hosting them altogether after the dinner. People still mentioned her from time to time, but always with that knowing tone, the one reserved for those who'd finally been exposed. And Blake? Last I heard, he moved to another city, started over in a smaller firm. Maybe it was good for him. Maybe for once, he'd learn what humility actually felt like. As for me, the world kept turning, faster, brighter. My company hit new heights. I bought a new car, not out of spite, but because I wanted to. I took my parents on a trip to Italy, first class, all expenses paid. Watching my mom cry at the view of the Amalfi Coast felt like closing a chapter one didn't know was still open. One evening, back home, I found myself driving by Sandra's old house. The porch light was off. The Harrison Family Holiday Spectacular banner was gone. The house looked smaller now, like the pride that once filled it had evaporated. I didn't stop. I just slowed down for a second, enough to look at that dark window and think, this is what happens when you build your worth on comparison. Then I drove away. Because the truth was, revenge had already done its job. It hadn't destroyed them, it had revealed them. And in that revelation, I'd found something far better than satisfaction. Peace. When people ask me now how I dealt with being the underdog in my family, I tell them this. Sometimes, silence is your greatest weapon. You don't have to shout. You don't have to prove anything. You just have to keep moving and let time do the talking. Because in the end, the ones who laugh the loudest always end up listening the hardest. And as I drove into the city lights that night, engine humming softly beneath me, I smiled to myself. The kind of quiet, private smile that only comes from knowing you've already won. You know those family gatherings where everyone pretends everything's fine, but the second someone pours the gravy, all the buried drama starts bubbling up? Yeah, that was our Thanksgiving this year. But unlike other years, I wasn't just a passive observer at the table. This time, I was the target. And I wasn't about to sit back and take it. Not after what my nephew said. Not after all I'd done for this family. And definitely not when I had a very particular contact in my phone who could end his little power trip with a single call. My name's Mason. I'm 46, live alone in a quiet suburb outside Austin, Texas, and I've spent the better part of 2 decades building a life most people in my family never really understood or appreciated. I'm a consultant in the infrastructure space, mostly private contracts, some federal work. I'm not flashy. I don't wear a Rolex or pull up to family dinners in a Tesla. I drive a 2011 Lexus, wear the same Patagonia jacket year-round, and most days, I work from a converted sunroom in my backyard with a space heater and my dog Ringo curled up at my feet. To the outside world, and especially to my family, I probably look like some quiet guy who never made it. And I've been fine with that. I never felt the need to explain how my low-key life was, in fact, the result of very deliberate choices. I got tired of the hustle, the airport lounges, the fake conversations. I made enough smart moves in my 30s that I could coast if I wanted to. But I still take on a few select projects a year. Not for money, for curiosity. My sister Veronica, though, she's never stopped judging me. And now that her oldest son, Brandon, just turned 26 and landed a shiny new tech job, she's convinced he's the future of the family. Her words, not mine. Thanksgiving at my sister's house has always been a show. She hosts with the kind of performative enthusiasm that makes your face hurt from smiling. There's a place card at every seat, a 3-tiered dessert tray, custom chalkboard signs with words like gratitude and family is everything. And beneath it all, a bubbling cauldron of subtle insults, status games, and quiet one-upping that never seems to run out of fuel. I considered skipping this year. Honestly, I've been close to skipping every year. But my mom asked me to come. She's 78, and the only real reason I ever show up to these things. She likes seeing the whole family together, even if it's a dysfunctional display of forced cheer and passive aggression. And I know she worries about me being alone on the holidays, even though I actually like my solitude. But for her, I came. I arrived with a bottle of Malbec and my usual quiet energy, nodding to my brother-in-law Dan as I stepped inside. He's harmless, more of a furniture piece than a person in these gatherings. He chuckled, handed me a drink, and disappeared back to the grill like he always does. I spotted Brandon almost immediately, slicked back hair, oversized watch, Apple Vision Pro goggles still around his neck like some kind of VR scarf. He was talking loudly to a cluster of cousins about a client escalation he handled that week. I rolled my eyes and walked toward the living room. We sat down to eat around 4. The table was immaculate, of course. Matching plates, miniature pumpkins, a handwritten menu. Veronica always went all out. Everyone took turns going around the table to say what they were thankful for, a tradition I usually endure in silence. My turn came, and I gave a simple answer. I'm thankful Mom's here. And that Ringo didn't get sprayed by another skunk this month. That got a polite laugh from the cousins. Veronica forced a smile. Brandon rolled his eyes. Then it happened. Not the big blow-up. Not yet. But the moment I should have known this year would be different. Brandon leaned forward, smirking. Uncle Mason, he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. What exactly do you do again? I keep forgetting. Now, this wasn't the first time Brandon had asked me this. It was, however, the first time he'd done it with that tone. The one kids use when they think they're finally smarter than you. The tone of a rising tech bro who just discovered stock options and thinks anyone without a blue check mark in a startup is wasting oxygen. I smiled calmly. Same thing I've done for years. I consult on infrastructure projects. What kind of projects? He pressed. I worked on the interstate expansions a few years back. Some utility grid work more recently. Mostly project strategy, compliance frameworks, and budget optimization. He blinked. So, like spreadsheets. Sometimes, I said, still smiling. But the kind of spreadsheets that keep cities running. He laughed. Wow. Okay. So you're basically the guy behind the guy who talks to the guy. A few chuckles. His younger brother Mason Jr. Yes, they named him after me. Looked uncomfortable. My mom gave me a soft pat on the hand, like she knew I was holding back. Veronica just sipped her wine and pretended not to hear. I wanted to let it go. I really did. But Brandon wasn't done. Honestly, he added, stabbing a piece of turkey. I don't get why someone smart like you never built something real. You just consult. It's like being a substitute teacher, but for businesses. The room went quiet. Now here's the thing. I don't need validation. Not from him. Not from Veronica. Not from anyone at that table. But there's a fine line between being humble and being humiliated. And Brandon was trying to cross it. So I took a slow sip of wine, locked eyes with him, and said, you know, Brandon, not everyone needs to build an app that fails in 2 years just to feel important. The silence got heavier. He chuckled again, trying to brush it off. Relax, Uncle Maze. I'm just saying, in today's world, you either innovate or you get left behind. I looked around the table. No one was jumping in. Not even Dan. Typical. But then Brandon said the one thing that flipped a switch in me. The thing that set everything in motion. He leaned back in his chair, looked me dead in the eye, and said, let's be real. You're just a nobody who got comfortable. That was it. My jaw clenched. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Because what Brandon didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that I had been talking to his boss for the last 3 months. His boss, Eric, was an old college friend of mine. We'd reconnected at a conference back in July. Grabbed dinner. Talked about work. Caught up on life. And last week, Eric called me up to talk about a problem employee who'd been slacking, showing attitude, and possibly leaking confidential data through unapproved channels. He never said the name. But after that comment, I had a strong feeling I knew exactly who it was. I looked across the table at Brandon and smiled. I'm sure your boss would be proud of how you carry yourself. Brandon, I said softly. What's his name again? Eric Wilkins. His face froze. His fork stopped midair. You know Eric? I nodded. Old friend. Played rugby together in college. We talk now and then. In fact, we talked just last week. The color drained from his face. Veronica looked confused. What's that got to do with anything? She asked, her voice sharper now. Oh, nothing, I said lightly. Just catching up. He mentioned he was evaluating a few people. said one of them was a bit entitled. Brandon suddenly looked like someone had swapped his turkey for a live grenade. I didn't say anything else. Not yet. But in that moment, with the air thick and everyone suddenly alert, I knew the tide had turned. And what happened next? Well, let's just say Thanksgiving wasn't over yet. Brandon barely spoke for the rest of dinner. He pushed his food around like a kid who'd just been told recess was canceled, barely making eye contact with anyone. Every once in a while, I'd catch him looking my way with this mix of confusion and panic, like he was trying to do the math in his head. How close is Uncle Mason with Eric? What did Eric say about me? Did I screw something up? I didn't give him anything. Just small talk with my mom. A couple polite laughs with the cousins. I wasn't about to air it out at the table, but the power dynamic had shifted. And he knew it. The kid who just called me a nobody was suddenly checking his phone under the table like it was a lifeline. After dessert, which, by the way, Veronica introduced with a speech about hard work and young ambition, clearly meant as a thinly veiled love letter to Brandon. People started breaking off into little clusters. Football in the den. Coffee in the kitchen. Some of the younger kids were outside in the yard kicking a soccer ball around. I wandered into the living room and sat down near the fireplace, taking a moment to decompress. My mom came over and sat beside me, resting her hand gently on my arm. "You all right?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She looked over at Brandon, who was in the kitchen with Veronica. "He didn't have to say that," she muttered. "You're not a nobody, Mason." "I'm sorry he said that." I patted her hand. "It's okay, Mom. Really." But inside, I wasn't okay. I wasn't even close. See, I could have let it end there. Could have gone home, chalked it up to another awkward family gathering, and moved on. But something about the way Veronica had looked at me when she said, "What's that got to do with anything?" Like my opinion didn't matter, like my connection couldn't possibly carry any weight, stuck with me. And something about Brandon's smugness, that entitlement, that complete lack of respect for anyone who wasn't impressed by his LinkedIn page, that lit a fire. I stayed for another hour or so, mostly out of courtesy to my mom. But the atmosphere had shifted. Brandon kept darting in and out of the room, whispering to Veronica. At one point, I saw her glancing at me, then typing something on her phone with rapid thumbs. Probably texting him, just apologize and smooth it over. But he never did. When I finally stood up to leave, Veronica approached me at the door. "Thanks for coming," she said, all smiles and fake warmth. "It's always nice when the whole family's together." I nodded. "Sure. Tell Dan the turkey was great." She tilted her head. "You know, Mason, I think Brandon struck a nerve earlier. But I hope you don't take it personally. He's just passionate." I looked her dead in the eye. Passion without humility isn't ambition. It's arrogance. She blinked, unsure how to respond. I didn't wait for one. Just pulled my coat on, gave Mom a hug, and headed out into the chilly night air. The next morning, my phone buzzed around 9 a.m. It was Eric. "Hey man," he said. "You free to talk for a sec?" I stepped out into my backyard, coffee in hand. "Yeah, what's up?" Eric sighed. "So, that kid I mentioned last week. The one we were reviewing." "Yeah." Turns out he did exactly what we suspected. Forwarded some sensitive project data to a personal drive. Said it was just for remote access, but we have policies against that. "Name?" I asked, though I already knew. "Brandon. Brandon Miles." I exhaled slowly, watching the steam rise off my coffee. Eric continued. "I know you said he was your nephew, and I didn't want to overstep, but I figured you'd want to know. What are you thinking?" I asked. "We're still deciding. There are two people on the chopping block right now. One's Brandon. The other is a guy who's underperforming but not breaking any rules." I was leaning toward giving Brandon a pass. You know, young guy, lots of potential. But now, he paused. "Now I'm thinking we need to send a message." I didn't tell Eric what had happened at dinner. Didn't need to. The wheels were already turning. But I did say one thing. Whatever you decide, make sure it's someone who respects the people around him. The company. The rules. "I hear you," Eric said. "We'll finalize things Monday." I hung up, heart still pounding. I wasn't sure what was about to happen. But I knew it wasn't over. That weekend, I kept a low profile. Didn't text anyone in the family. Didn't check Facebook. Just took Ringo for long walks, caught up on some reading, and waited. Monday came and went without incident. Then Tuesday morning, I woke up to a single text from Brandon. "Did you talk to Eric?" That was it. No greeting. No context. Just that question. I stared at it for a moment, then typed back. I didn't need to. No reply. By noon, my sister was calling. I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted, then called again. Finally, I picked up on the third try. What did you do? She demanded. No hello. No preamble. Good morning to you too, I said calmly. Mason, don't play dumb. Brandon just got a notice that he's being evaluated for a possible termination. Eric said the decision was made over the weekend. You were at dinner with us, and suddenly you're in Eric's ear? What did you say? I kept my tone even. I didn't tell Eric anything he didn't already know. He called me, not the other way around. Veronica's voice cracked. He said Brandon violated protocol, that he was careless with confidential info. That's not like him. I raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? She fell silent. Veronica, I've been patient. For years. I've watched you prop him up, enable him, let him walk around with that smug attitude like the world owes him something. I stayed quiet through all the backhanded comments, the judgment, the lectures about real jobs. But Thursday? That crossed a line. He's just a kid, Mason. He's 26. Old enough to know better. Old enough to face consequences. There was a pause. Then she dropped the real bomb. Mom's upset. She said you embarrassed the family. She said you threatened Brandon. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was pathetic. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply reminded Brandon that the world is smaller than he thinks. You always do this, she snapped. You think because you're quiet and mysterious and you know a few people in high places, you can just mess with our lives. Well, guess what? This isn't your playground, Mason. You don't get to control everything. I'm not trying to, I said. But I also don't owe you silence anymore. She hung up. I sat there for a while, staring at the blank screen. The call had left me shaking. Not from fear. From anger. From sadness. From the realization that this wasn't just a one-off Thanksgiving insult. This was years of quiet dismissal, finally boiling over. I thought back to all the other family events. The birthday parties where Brandon got expensive gifts while I brought thoughtful ones and got polite nods. The way Veronica would say things like, Mason's just more of a minimalist whenever someone asked about my life, as if that explained everything. The way I was always asked to take the group photos, never be in them. It all made sense now. To them, I was a placeholder, a quiet uncle, a background character in the story of Brandon's rise. And the worst part? I'd let them write me that way. Until now. What happened next, how it all unraveled, wasn't part of my plan. I hadn't orchestrated it. But I sure as hell wasn't going to stop it either. Because when the truth finally came out, it was worse than any of us expected. The fallout came quickly. By Thursday morning, the entire family knew. It started with a Facebook post from Brandon's fiancée, something vague like, people show their true colors when their ego's threatened. Then came the private messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, asking, hey, did something happen with Brandon and his job? One even said, I heard you got him fired. Is that true? No one asked how I was doing. No one asked if maybe there was more to the story. They just assumed I was the villain. The jealous uncle. The bitter, middle-aged man who couldn't handle the success of the younger generation. And I'll admit, for a moment, I let it get to me. Friday afternoon, I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at my phone, rereading a text from my aunt. One that simply said, Mason, whatever this feud is, fix it before it breaks the family. My stomach sank. Not because I cared what she thought, but because it hit me that this wasn't a feud. It was a purge, and I was being cast out. By Sunday, I was completely iced out. I wasn't tagged in the Thanksgiving family photo Veronica posted. I wasn't mentioned in any of the comments. Even my younger cousin Tyler, the one I used to help with college applications, had unfriended me. The message was clear, Mason's out. It was weird how fast the isolation hit. One week you're passing the mashed potatoes, the next, you're a cautionary tale. The guy who couldn't keep his mouth shut. The guy who burned bridges. And for a few days, I let that narrative seep in. I stopped checking my messages. Skipped my morning walks with Ringo. Barely touched the pasta I'd made on Sunday night. I even considered emailing Eric to tell him maybe he'd made a mistake. That Brandon didn't deserve to lose everything over one misstep. That maybe I had stirred the pot too much. But I didn't. Because somewhere beneath all the guilt and loneliness, I felt something stronger. Relief. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't smiling through clenched teeth while people who barely knew what I did for a living passed judgment on my worth. I wasn't playing the humble uncle role while Brandon gave TED Talks at the dinner table. For the first time in a long time, I was just me. No more scripts. No more nodding along. And in that silence, in the ache of exclusion, something started to shift. On Monday, I woke up early and went for a run. Not a jog. A run. Heart pounding, lungs burning, Ringo sprinting beside me. I pushed myself through 5 miles, came home drenched in sweat, and collapsed onto the floor with a grin that surprised even me. By noon, I was back in my office, the sunroom with the space heater and the French press, and I started sorting through my old project files. Half-finished proposals, unanswered emails, opportunities I'd let sit idle for too long. And then, like a bolt from the blue, I remembered an email from 6 months ago, one I hadn't followed up on. It was from a startup in Denver working on high-efficiency modular bridges for rural counties, something right in my wheelhouse. At the time, I'd ignored it. Too much family noise. Too many maybe laters. I opened the email, read through the proposal, and clicked reply. Still interested in collaborating? I've got some bandwidth and ideas. I hit send. That small act, that one deliberate decision, became the first brick in what would quietly become the most fulfilling chapter of my career. The next week, I booked a short trip to Denver. Paid my own way. Met with the startup team. Talked shop. Spitballed ideas over coffee. They were young, bright, and eager, but missing real-world experience. I offered to come on as a strategic advisor, part-time. They agreed on the spot. 2 weeks later, we had a pilot proposal sent to 3 counties in Colorado. By Christmas, we were greenlit in one of them. While my family was passing around eggnog and pretending I didn't exist, I was knee-deep in engineering schematics and budget optimizations, and loving every second of it. Funny how things work. I didn't post about it. Didn't email the family a "look what I'm doing" update. I just worked. Quietly. Patiently. Letting the results speak for themselves. Meanwhile, the silence from my family stretched on. My mom called on Christmas Eve. She always does. Said she missed me. Asked if I was eating enough. Said she didn't want to choose sides, but that things had gotten out of hand. I could hear the strain in her voice, that sadness of a mother watching her kids drift further apart. "I just don't understand why he'd throw away such a good job," she said softly. Brandon had everything going for him. I sighed. "That's the thing, Mom. He thought he could never lose it." There was a pause. "Did you really talk to his boss?" "I didn't need to," I repeated. His own actions spoke for themselves. She didn't push further. Just said she loved me, and that the door was always open. That night, I sat on the couch with Ringo, a blanket around my shoulders, and a mug of hot cider in my hands. I watched It's a Wonderful Life, and for the first time in years, the ending didn't feel like fiction. See, for most of my life, I'd let people define me by what I wasn't. Not married. Not ambitious enough. Not flashy. Not successful enough. Not loud. Not confident enough. But slowly, day by day, I was remembering who I actually was. The guy who kept projects on time and under budget. The guy who helped counties rebuild bridges after storms. The guy who paid off Mom's mortgage without ever mentioning it. The guy who once mentored a kid through community college who now runs a city planning firm. I wasn't a nobody. I was just quiet. And now, I was done being quiet about the things that mattered. January rolled in with a fury of snowstorms across the Midwest, and suddenly our pilot project was being cited in statewide emergency prep discussions. The modular bridge we'd helped design? It held up during a flash flood that washed out 2 others nearby. Eric texted me a link to the local news coverage with a simple, "That's your work, man. Proud of you." I smiled. Then I got another text, from someone I didn't expect. "Brandon, do you have a minute to talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't heard from him since that single "Did you talk to Eric?" message weeks ago. No apology. No clarification. Just silence. And now here he was, reaching out. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I closed my phone, walked to the window, and looked out at the snowy street below. Ringo barked softly beside me, tail thumping. I was no longer the man sitting in the shadows. I was rising. Quietly. Steadily. But the question still lingered in my mind. Why now? What did Brandon want? What was coming next? And was I ready for it? Brandon's message sat there like a ghost. Simple. Unassuming. But it carried the weight of everything left unsaid. "Do you have a minute to talk?" I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have things to say. I did, and they weren't polite. But the truth is, I'd moved past needing anything from him. I didn't want an apology wrapped in manipulation. I didn't need a half-hearted, I messed up, but you overreacted too. I wasn't interested in opening the door just to be judged again. So I waited. 2 days later, he texted again. Please. I just want to talk. Still, I said nothing. Then the third message came. Uncle Mason, I'm in a bad spot. I need your help. I swear this isn't about Thanksgiving. That one made me pause. Because it sounded real. I didn't trust it. Not yet. But it was enough for me to reply with a single word. Call. No pleasantries. No emojis. Just the offer. If he wanted to talk, he could do it with his voice. He called within 30 seconds. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. His voice was strained, but trying too hard to sound casual. Hey, thanks for responding. I didn't say anything. I know things got weird, he continued awkwardly. And I know I crossed a line. But I really didn't mean to disrespect you. I don't know. I thought you were cool with the jokes. I didn't know you knew Eric. That whole thing blindsided me. There it was. Not I was wrong. Not I regret how I treated you. Just I didn't know you had power. I stayed quiet. Brandon cleared his throat. Look, I'm in trouble. Real trouble. After the review, Eric didn't just let me go. He reported the incident to the company's legal team. Said it violated contract terms. Now they're pushing to recover damages over the security breach. I blinked. Wait, they're suing you. Not directly, he rushed. Yet. But there's talk. And the worst part is, I can't find a new job. Everyone's either ghosting me or rejecting me last minute. I think Eric put something in my file. Like some red flag. No one's saying it, but I can feel it. Doors are closing. My mind raced. That didn't sound like Eric. He was firm, but fair. He wouldn't blacklist a guy unless there was more to the story. Why are you calling me? I asked. Brandon hesitated. Because I know you're connected. And because I don't know who else to call. Mom's panicking. Dad's useless. And he trailed off. Then said, quieter, I messed up. Big time. I didn't reply. Just let the silence stretch. Finally, he added, I heard about the bridge project. Eric mentioned it before he cut me off. Said you were doing real work again. I figured maybe you'd let me help out. Learn from you. Shadow you. Whatever. I almost laughed. Shadow me. After all that? He wanted to ride my coattails now? But something in his voice caught me off guard. He wasn't cocky. He wasn't baiting me. He was scared. And that scared kid part of him. The part one used to help build Lego sets with when he was 8. The part that used to look up to me before Veronica got in his head. That part stirred something in me. Let me think about it, I said flatly. I'll call you back. I hung up. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I started digging. Not to be nosy. Not to punish. But because something didn't sit right with me. If Brandon had truly leaked confidential data, Eric would have terminated him cleanly and moved on. A black mark, sure, but not legal action. That meant the breach was more serious. Which meant Brandon was either lying or hiding something worse. I called Eric that evening. I figured you'd be calling, he said. Is it true? I asked. That you're pushing legal? Eric sighed. We didn't want to. But once we started auditing his accounts, we found something bigger. He didn't just transfer data to his own drive. He forwarded proprietary design docs to a competitor. My stomach dropped. Wait, what? Eric's tone hardened. We've got email logs. A flagged domain. The startup's still small. They didn't know what they were looking at, thank God. But it's bad, Mason. It's industrial espionage, even if he didn't realize the implications. I sat there, stunned. I thought about warning you, Eric said. But I figured you'd keep your distance. I did. Until today. There was a long pause. Then Eric said something that made my blood go cold. And one more thing. He listed you as a reference on one of his job applications. What? Yup. Claimed he worked with you on a few confidential projects in the past. Even mentioned the modular bridge pilot. I only caught it because someone from a hiring board reached out to verify. I felt the anger rise like a tide. So that was the game. Brandon wasn't just reaching out for help. He was trying to co-opt my credibility, sneak into my lane under the guise of learning from me. And now? Now I was done playing nice. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. The betrayal sat heavy in my chest. Not just because of what he did, but because of the pattern. The assumption that no matter how he treated me, I'd always be there. The safe, quiet uncle. The one who wouldn't retaliate. Well, this time, he'd chosen the wrong scapegoat. And I had the receipts. Over the next few days, I began to lay the groundwork. I reached out to an old contact from a legal compliance firm I used to consult for, not to sue Brandon, but to get an airtight timeline of my own involvement in the bridge project, complete with NDAs, timestamped emails, and advisory agreements. I wanted it all documented, in case he tried to implicate me by association. I then contacted the Denver startup. I told them Brandon might reach out under false pretenses, possibly claiming past work or connections. I warned them to be careful. They were grateful for the heads up. Then I set up a meeting with a journalist I'd known for years, someone who wrote for a regional business journal. We'd talked in the past about doing a piece on public-private infrastructure innovations. I told him I was ready. But this time, I didn't just want to highlight the bridge. I wanted to talk about integrity, about silent contributors, about how trust can make or break a project. He was intrigued. Is there a story behind the story? He asked. Not one I'm ready to name, I replied. But let's just say some lessons come the hard way. We set the interview date for next week. And finally, with all the chess pieces in motion, I crafted one last move. I drafted an email to Brandon. Short, polite, precise. Brandon, after our recent conversation, I looked into your situation further. I've since learned that you listed me as a reference without my permission and claimed involvement in projects where you had no role. This is unacceptable. I am formally requesting that you remove my name from any job materials or correspondence going forward. If you fail to do so, I will pursue formal action to protect my professional reputation. I hope you find clarity in this difficult season, but I will no longer be a part of your story. Mason. I hit send. And with that, I waited for the storm, waited for the moment the world, or at least his world, would shift. Because the final act hadn't started yet, but the stage was set, and the curtain was about to rise. The email was sent. No threats, no anger, just boundaries. And it must have hit harder than I expected, because for the first time in months, Brandon stayed silent. Not a single reply. No defensive text. No, you misunderstood, or I didn't mean it like that. Just complete radio silence. The kind that either means someone's thinking very carefully or scrambling to do damage control behind the scenes. But I didn't wait for him to respond. I had no intention of giving him space to explain, twist, or apologize. Because this wasn't about one act of betrayal. It was about a lifetime of disrespect from him, from Veronica, from the whole rotten culture that they built together. The arrogance, the dismissiveness, the entitlement. So I did what I always do best. I worked quietly, and I executed perfectly. The journalist came by that Friday. James Prescott, sharp guy, early 40s, wire-rimmed glasses, and a keen instinct for sniffing out stories hiding under the radar. We spent 2 hours talking in my sunroom while Ringo snored at our feet. He asked about the bridge project, but what really intrigued him was the way I described my journey. Stepping back from corporate life, prioritizing purpose over prestige, rebuilding infrastructure without making noise. At one point, he asked, "How did you get connected with the Denver team?" I smiled. I didn't chase it. They reached out. People tend to find you when you're quietly solving real problems. He grinned and jotted that down. I never once mentioned Brandon's name. Never hinted at our family drama. I didn't need to. But I made sure one quote made it into the piece. The biggest risk in any project isn't technical. It's human. One wrong ego in the room can burn down years of work. The article went live on Monday morning. The quiet architect behind Colorado's resilient infrastructure. How one man's low-profile vision is reinventing public-private partnerships. It took off faster than I expected. Picked up by a few national blogs. Shared by some local government forums. Even got a shout-out from the Department of Transportation's regional Twitter account. But more importantly, it showed up on LinkedIn. And that's where the real shift began. Suddenly, I was the name being whispered in professional circles. Recruiters reached out. Old colleagues commented with praise. And best of all, people from Brandon's world started noticing. I didn't have to dig. They came to me. On Wednesday, I got a call from a hiring board committee member from a major consultancy in Dallas. "Hey, Mason, quick question. Did you ever actually supervise or work with a Brandon Miles? He listed you as a reference on his submission packet last month." I chuckled softly. "He's my nephew. But no, we've never worked together professionally." A pause on the line. "Interesting," the guy said. "He claimed direct involvement in the Denver project and referenced you as his team lead." "I'd be careful with him," I said flatly. That's all I'll say. The man thanked me, then hung up. I knew that phone call wasn't the only one happening. Behind the scenes, Brandon's version of reality was crumbling. The false narratives, the inflated credentials, the idea that he could weaponize family ties without permission. They were all unraveling, and he had no way to patch it up because I wasn't playing anymore. And then came the final blow. That Friday, I got a voicemail from Veronica. Her voice was thin, brittle. "Mason, I don't even know where to begin. Brandon got a formal letter from a legal team today. Eric's company is pursuing restitution. They're claiming he breached a non-compete and shared proprietary material. Brandon swears he didn't understand the terms, that he was just trying to build a connection with another startup. But the damage is done." She exhaled, shaky. "And now that article is everywhere. People are praising you, talking about your integrity. And he's getting emails from recruiters rescinding interest. Someone told him he's being blackballed. I don't even know if that's true. But Mason, you've made your point. Okay, he's hurting. I'm hurting. Please. Enough." I sat with the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. I didn't respond, because I'd heard that tone before. From people who weren't sorry they crossed a line, just sorry they got caught doing it. Brandon wasn't hurting because I ruined him. He was hurting because he built a house out of borrowed credibility, and I finally took back my bricks. And Veronica? She wasn't calling for peace. She was calling for pity. But pity is something you earn when you show humility, not when you realize your golden boy is human after all. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. "Brandon, Uncle Mason, I don't know how to fix what I broke. I don't know if I can. But I'm writing because I owe you the thing I never gave you at dinner, the truth. I didn't understand what you did. I thought success had to be loud. I thought influence had to be visible. But now I see that you've been the most powerful man at our table for years, and I was too arrogant to notice. I disrespected you, lied about working with you, tried to use your name to clean up a mess I created. I'm sorry, truly, not for the consequences, but for how I treated you, for what I became. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to hear it from me. Brandon." I folded the letter and set it on my desk. Then I sat back and breathed, not out of triumph, but peace. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd finally stepped out of the shadow they had painted me into, and back into the person I'd quietly been all along. Not bitter, not loud, just focused. A man who knows his worth, and makes sure others do too. I never replied to Brandon's letter, not out of cruelty, but because, sometimes, silence is the clearest answer. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a regional infrastructure summit. Not a keynote. I'm not that kind of guy. Just a panel discussion about modular design and smart funding models. The kind of quiet innovation no one notices until a bridge holds up during a storm. Before I took the stage, a young engineer approached me, bright-eyed, eager. "Hey, I just wanted to say, your story really inspired me. I read about you in the journal. The way you handled everything. That's the kind of integrity I want to build my career on." I shook his hand, smiled, and said, "Then you're already on the right path." And when I stepped onto that stage, I wasn't thinking about Brandon, or Veronica, or any of the people who used to look down on me. I was thinking about the work, about legacy, and about one simple truth. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming the man they said you'd never be. 5 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. My name's Evan. I'm 32 now, but back then I was 27, young, ambitious, and stupidly in love. The kind of love that makes you believe the world is fair, that loyalty means something, and that people you trust could never twist the knife in your back. I had a steady job, a decent apartment, and a fiancée named Lauren who I genuinely thought was my soulmate. We'd been together since college, survived long distance, bad jobs, even a brief breakup that I thought made us stronger. And then there was Tyler, my best friend since we were kids. The kind of friend who knew every embarrassing story, every insecurity, every dream I'd ever confessed after a few too many beers. The kind of friend who stood next to me as my best man when I first proposed. I used to think of him as the brother I never had. Looking back, I should have known better. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens after. About how people like Tyler and Lauren can tear your life apart and still have the audacity to smile in your face years later like they've won something. And how, sometimes, patience is the sharpest form of revenge. Before everything fell apart, life felt peaceful. I'd just gotten promoted at work, my mom was healthy, and Lauren and I had started planning the wedding. She wanted something small, just family and a few close friends. Tyler was, of course, my first choice for best man. He joked that he'd make sure I didn't faint at the altar, and I laughed, thinking that was the biggest problem we'd face. My mom adored Lauren. She'd always say, "That girl grounds you, Evan. You get lost in your head too much, but she brings you back down." Mom had this quiet warmth about her. She was the kind of person who believed the best in everyone. Maybe that's where I got it from. Tyler was around all the time. He'd stop by for dinner, help us with furniture, tag along on double dates with his latest fling. He'd never been the settling type, always bouncing from one relationship to another, charming his way through life like rules didn't apply to him. Still, he was fun, charismatic. People liked him. Even Lauren seemed to light up when he was around, laughing at his stupid jokes that weren't even that funny. I noticed, sure, but I didn't think much of it. She laughed like that with everyone. Then there were small things that, in hindsight, feel like red flags I just didn't want to see. A text from Tyler late at night. "Tell Lauren I'll grab the thing tomorrow." Except I never told her about the thing. Or the time Lauren came home from errands, wearing a hoodie that looked awfully familiar, one I'd seen hanging in Tyler's truck. When I asked, she brushed it off with a smile. "Oh, he let me borrow it when it got cold. Don't be jealous." I laughed, told her I wasn't jealous. Maybe I should have been. My mom was the first to sense something was off. She pulled me aside one evening after dinner and said quietly, "You trust Tyler too much." I remember chuckling and saying, "He's my best friend, Mom. I've known him longer than I've known myself." She just gave me that look, the kind mothers give when they know something you don't. "Be careful, honey. Some people only love you as long as they're ahead of you." I didn't understand what she meant then. The downfall started slow, like a crack in a windshield that spreads until everything shatters. It was about a month before the wedding. Lauren became distant, said she was stressed, tired, needed space. I tried to be understanding. I planned date nights, surprised her with flowers, offered to postpone the wedding if it would help. But she just seemed gone, detached. Tyler, meanwhile, was more involved than ever. He'd text me daily about wedding plans, ask about the venue, the food, even joke about how crazy brides get before the big day. Then came the night everything changed. I'd left work early, wanting to surprise Lauren with dinner. She'd said she was staying home, not feeling great. On the drive back, I remember feeling weirdly nervous, that kind of gut feeling that something's wrong, but you can't quite place it. When I pulled into our driveway, there was another car parked out front. Tyler's truck. I remember my first thought being that maybe he stopped by to check on her. That's what friends do, right? But when I opened the door and heard the laughter, soft, familiar, intimate, I knew. I don't even remember walking down the hallway, just the sound of my heartbeat thundering in my ears. When I opened the bedroom door, there they were. Lauren froze first. Tyler looked at me like a deer caught in headlights. The silence that followed was deafening. Then he had the nerve to say, "Evan, man, it's not what it looks like." I think I laughed. Actually laughed. Because what else could I do? I remember saying something like, "Oh, thank God." For a second I thought my best friend was in bed with my fiancé. He tried to speak again, but I couldn't hear it. I just walked out. That night, I drove for hours. I don't know where I went. I just needed to be away, from the apartment, from them, from the version of myself that thought loyalty mattered. I ended up at my mom's place around midnight, knocking on her door like a kid who'd had a nightmare. She opened it, took one look at me, and pulled me into a hug. I didn't have to say anything. She already knew. The days after were a blur. Lauren tried to call. I blocked her. Tyler texted me, said he didn't mean for it to happen. Like that made it better. My mom wanted to march over there and teach that boy a lesson, but I told her it wasn't worth it. Truthfully, I didn't have the strength to care. I just wanted it all gone. The memories, the plans, the future I thought I had. So I left. Sold the apartment, switched jobs, moved 2 towns over. Started from scratch. It wasn't glamorous. I spent the first year in a cheap 1-bedroom, working long hours and avoiding people. But slowly, life rebuilt itself. I met new friends. Found hobbies. Eventually, I met someone new, Claire. She was quiet where Lauren had been loud, steady where Lauren had been unpredictable. She didn't rush me to heal. She just stayed. And over time, I began to feel whole again. Then last week, my mom passed away. It wasn't sudden. She'd been battling heart problems for years, but it still hit me like a truck. She was the one person who'd never betrayed me, the only person who stood by me through everything. Losing her felt like losing the last piece of home I had left. Her funeral was yesterday. Small, intimate, just like she would have wanted. I kept my distance from most people from my old life, but apparently, not everyone got the memo. Because as I stood by her casket, shaking hands, trying to keep it together, I heard a familiar voice behind me. That smug, drawling tone I hadn't heard in 5 years. Evan, long time no see, man. I turned around, and there he was. Tyler. Same confident grin, same fake charm. And on his arm, dressed in black, was Lauren, my ex-fiancée. For a second, I thought maybe I was hallucinating. But no, she looked right at me, eyes darting nervously, and he just smirked. Then he leaned in, close enough that only I could hear, and said with a grin, "Guess I won after all." That was the moment everything inside me went still. Because after 5 years of silence, 5 years of rebuilding, of holding back every ounce of bitterness, I finally realized something. He thought he'd won. He really believed it. I smiled back, calm as ever, looked him dead in the eyes, and asked, "You still renting that one-bedroom apartment?" He blinked, caught off guard. And that's when Claire, my wife, walked through the door. The look on his face was priceless. But that's not where this story ends. Not even close. Because what happened after the funeral made it clear, Tyler wasn't done with me yet. And this time, I wasn't going to walk away quietly. If I hadn't lived through it myself, I wouldn't believe what happened next. When I saw Tyler's face twist from smug satisfaction to stunned disbelief as Claire walked in, holding our daughter's hand, no less, a small part of me thought that would be the end of it. That maybe, just maybe, seeing that I'd moved on, that I'd built a life without them, would finally make him back off. But that was wishful thinking. Because people like Tyler, they don't stop when they lose. They try to rewrite the story. After the funeral service, I did my best to stay composed. Claire held my hand, whispering little reassurances like, "You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to," while I greeted people I hadn't seen in years. Old neighbors, a few family friends, even my aunt from out of state. It was surreal, grief mixed with awkward small talk, memories of my mom flooding back between every handshake. But the worst part wasn't the loss. It was the weight of Tyler's presence behind me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd catch him staring every so often, that same fake smile plastered on his face. Lauren avoided my eyes, clutching his arm like it was a lifeline. She looked older, tired. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the weight of choices she couldn't undo. For a brief, stupid moment, I felt pity. Then I remembered walking into my old bedroom that night, and the pity evaporated. After the service, people gathered in the church hall for food and coffee. I stayed near the entrance, talking to a few of Mom's old co-workers, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Didn't think you'd show your face," Tyler said, his tone casual, but laced with that same arrogance he'd always had. "I came to bury my mother," I replied, not even turning fully toward him. "Not to revisit the past." He chuckled. "Still dramatic, huh? Relax, man. It's been years." I finally faced him. "Exactly. So maybe you should keep it that way." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not guilt, but amusement. "You've changed," he said. "Used to be you'd do anything to keep the peace. Guess marrying up gave you a backbone." I didn't rise to it. Claire walked over just then, holding 2 cups of coffee. She smiled politely, extending one to me, then turned to him. "You must be Tyler," she said evenly. He grinned, like the attention fed him. "And you must be the new Mrs. whatever your name is now." "Evan," she corrected sharply. "Mrs. Evan Cole." There was a brief silence. Then he looked her up and down in that smug, appraising way that made my blood boil. "He's really upgraded," he said with a smirk. "Congrats." Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "Funny," she said calmly. "He said the same thing this morning." Tyler blinked, clearly not expecting that. She handed me my coffee and walked away like nothing had happened. That was the thing about Claire. She never needed to raise her voice to make her point. I thought that exchange would be the last of it. But as the afternoon went on, Tyler found excuses to hover nearby, making comments to people we both knew, always loud enough for me to hear. "Yeah, Evan and I go way back. I was basically his brother. Helped him through everything, even his engagement," he'd say with a smirk. Or, "Funny how life works out, huh? Some people just can't handle competition." Every word was designed to get under my skin. And it worked. The thing about grief is, it strips you raw. You're vulnerable, fragile, just trying to stay upright. And he knew that. I could feel him watching for cracks. It was my cousin Ben who finally pulled me aside. You okay, man? That guy's been running his mouth all afternoon. I'm fine, I lied. Ben frowned. You sure? 'Cause if you want me to escort him out, I will. I almost said yes. But Mom's voice echoed in my head. Some people only love you as long as they're ahead of you. Tyler wanted a reaction. He wanted me to break, to remind everyone that I was still the guy whose best friend ran off with his fiancée. I wasn't giving him that satisfaction. But the universe, as usual, had other plans. When the event ended and people started leaving, I noticed Lauren walking toward me. Slowly, hesitant. She looked nervous, glancing around like she wasn't sure if approaching me was a good idea. Claire had gone to the car with our daughter, so it was just me standing by the door. Evan, she said softly, can we talk? I didn't answer at first, just stared. She looked smaller than I remembered. Paler. About what? I finally said. She swallowed hard. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. You think 5 years later, this is the time and place for that? Her eyes glistened. I know it doesn't change what I did. Lauren, I cut in. You don't have to explain. You made your choice. She nodded slowly. I did. And it was a mistake. That caught me off guard. You're still with him. Her gaze flicked toward Tyler, who was chatting animatedly across the room. Yeah, she said quietly. Sometimes mistakes drag on. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. She'd destroyed my life, and now she regretted it. But instead, I just felt empty. Then she looked up at me again and said something that made my stomach twist. He hasn't changed, Evan. Not really. He talks about you all the time. It's like he's obsessed. Obsessed? I repeated. She nodded. He still compares himself to you. Every little thing. Where you live, what you drive, your job. It drives him crazy that you moved on. I didn't get to respond, because just then, Tyler noticed us. His expression darkened instantly, and he walked over, jaw tight. What's going on here? He demanded, slipping an arm around her shoulder. Nothing, I said. We were just talking. About what? About how you still can't stand not being the center of attention. He gritted his teeth, forcing a smile. Careful, man. Wouldn't want to make a scene. You already did, I said quietly, brushing past him. As I walked out, I could feel his glare burning into my back. That was the moment I realized this wasn't over. Tyler wasn't just showing up to gloat. He was baiting me. He wanted a rematch, a new chance to prove he was better, and he wasn't going to stop until he tried. Over the next week, weird things started happening. Small things at first. An email from an unknown address filled with old photos of me and Lauren. A Facebook friend request from a fake account using a picture of my wife. Then a message on LinkedIn, of all places, saying, guess you're not the only one who can move on. No name. But I knew. Then one morning, Claire came into the kitchen holding her phone. Do you know a Tyler Grant? She asked, her expression unreadable. My stomach sank. Yeah. What? He messaged me. I froze. What? She handed me the phone. The message was short, but every word dripped with malice. Hey Claire, just thought you should know your husband isn't as honest as you think. Maybe we should talk sometime. From one friend to another. I felt my pulse spike. When did he send this? Last night, she said. I didn't respond. But, Evan, what's going on? I took a deep breath. It's him. He's trying to mess with us. Claire frowned. Why? After all this time? Because he can't stand the idea that I'm happy, I said quietly. He needs to win. She reached across the table, placing her hand on mine. Then we make sure he doesn't. For a while, we tried to ignore it. Blocked his accounts, tightened privacy settings, even told a few friends to keep an eye out for fake profiles. But Tyler was persistent. He started calling from unknown numbers, leaving voicemails with fake pleasantries. Hey buddy, just checking in. Hope the new job's treating you well. Sometimes, I'd hear Lauren's voice faintly in the background, telling him to stop. The last straw came 2 weeks later. I was leaving work late when I spotted his truck parked across the street from my office. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe someone else had the same model. But when I got in my car, I saw him sitting there, grinning, phone in hand. He rolled down the window. You look busy these days, man. Miss the old times. Go home, Tyler, I said flatly. He leaned back in his seat. Funny. I was going to say the same thing to your wife. I stepped closer. If you ever contact her again, I'll make sure you regret it. He laughed. Relax. I'm just catching up. It's not my fault you're still sensitive. Sensitive? I repeated. You ruined my life once. I won't let you do it again. He smirked. Ruined? You should thank me. If it weren't for me, you'd still be stuck with her. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to walk away. Giving him what he wanted, a reaction, would only make things worse. But later that night, as I lay awake next to Claire, I realized something important. Tyler wasn't just trying to annoy me. He was testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push before I snapped. And the longer I stayed silent, the more confident he'd get. That was when I decided I wasn't going to play defense anymore. Because Tyler had spent 5 years believing he'd broken me. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that I'd spent those same 5 years learning how to rebuild myself. How to plan. How to wait. And if he wanted a war, I was finally ready to give him one. The next few weeks felt like a test of how much I could endure before something broke. Tyler wasn't just a ghost from the past anymore. He was a presence again, a shadow that somehow managed to slip back into my life without permission. After the funeral, I thought he'd fade out, that his bruised ego would make him retreat. But instead, it was like the encounter had reignited something in him, a need to prove, once again, that he could take what was mine. It started small. He began showing up at places I frequented, the coffee shop near my office, the same gym I'd been going to for years, even the local park where Claire and I took our daughter on weekends. Every time, it was coincidental. He'd flash that same grin, make small talk, and pretend it was normal. Hey man, didn't know you came here too, he'd say, as if we hadn't spent years avoiding each other. The first time, I just ignored it. The second time, I gave him a tight smile and walked away. The third time, I started realizing this wasn't chance, it was choreography. He was watching me. Claire noticed the tension too. She didn't say it outright at first, but one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner, she asked, "You ever feel like someone's following you?" I froze. What do you mean? I ran into that guy again. Tyler, at the store this morning, she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling just slightly as she dried a glass. He said hi. Asked how you were holding up after your mom's funeral. I clenched my jaw. He talked to you? Yeah. I didn't want to make a scene, but, Evan, it felt off. Like he was fishing for something. That was Tyler's specialty, acting harmless while planting little hooks into people's lives. I told her I'd handle it, but the truth was, I didn't know how yet. Then, one night, the hook caught. It was a Thursday. Claire had gone to bed early, and I was working late in the office downstairs, going through some files. Around midnight, I got a text from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was spam, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of my daughter's school. The caption read, "Cute kid. Looks like her mom." I shot up so fast I nearly knocked over my chair. I didn't even think. I called the number immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I texted back, "Who is this?" even though I already knew. No reply. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I dropped my daughter off myself, checking every car in the lot. I didn't see him, but that didn't mean he wasn't there. Claire noticed how tense I was, and when I told her what happened, she went pale. "That's it," she said. "We're going to the police." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I knew how this would look. A grown man accusing his ex-best friend of stalking him, based on a text from an unknown number. Tyler was careful, always just subtle enough to stay out of legal reach. So I decided to confront him myself. I waited until Saturday, when I knew he'd be at his usual bar, the same one we used to go to back in the day. I showed up alone. When I walked in, he was there, sitting at the counter, drink in hand, chatting up the bartender like he owned the place. "Evan," he said when he saw me, all fake cheer. "Man, what are the odds?" I walked right up to him. "You need to stop." He blinked, feigning confusion. "Stop what?" "Following my wife. Messaging her. Taking pictures of my kid's school." His smile faltered for a second, just a second, before returning. "That's a serious accusation, man. Don't play dumb. You're not as subtle as you think." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You really think the world revolves around you, huh? Not everything I do is about you, Evan." I stared at him, my voice low but sharp. "You've been obsessed with me since we were kids. You couldn't stand it when I got something you didn't have. A job, a fiancé, a future. So you took it." He smirked. "And look how that turned out. Maybe I did you a favor. Don't test me." I said, my hands trembling now, not from fear but from restraint. He chuckled, sipping his drink. You always had that temper. It's what made you so easy to beat. You think you've moved on, but you haven't. You're still that same insecure kid who looked up to me. That last part hit harder than I expected. Because for years, I had looked up to him. I admired him, trusted him. And in one night, he'd taken that trust and turned it into a weapon. I turned to leave, but he called out, "Hey, before you go, tell your wife she's got good taste. Guess she likes my type." I didn't hit him. Not then. But it took everything in me not to. For the next few days, I stayed on edge, checking the locks, keeping my phone close, glancing out the window every time headlights passed. But things seemed to quiet down. No more messages. No sightings. Claire started to relax again. I almost believed maybe confronting him had worked. Then the betrayal came. Not from Tyler this time, but from somewhere I didn't expect. It was a week later. I came home from work, exhausted, and found Claire sitting at the dining table, pale and silent, her laptop open in front of her. "Evan," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Those words always send a chill down your spine, no matter how long you've been married. "What's wrong?" I asked, setting down my bag. She turned the screen toward me. It was an email from Tyler. My name in the subject line. The message read, "Claire, I didn't want to be the one to tell you, but you deserve the truth. Evan wasn't honest with you about what really happened between him, me, and Lauren. You should ask him why she left. Tyler." Attached was a single photo, an old one. Me and Lauren at a party, taken years before we got engaged. Her hand on my shoulder, smiling. Completely harmless. But underneath it, in smaller text, was something that made my blood run cold. What he did to her was worse than what she did to him. Claire's eyes were glistening. "Evan, what is this supposed to mean?" I sat down slowly, feeling the air leave my lungs. "It's a lie," I said. "He's trying to get in your head." "But why would he say that?" she pressed. "What could he possibly mean?" "Nothing," I said firmly. "He's making things up, trying to cause trouble." She hesitated. "You never told me the full story about what happened with Lauren." That stung more than I expected. I thought I had told her, enough of it at least. But I realized I'd always glossed over the painful parts, the betrayal, the humiliation. Maybe she saw that as omission. Maybe Tyler saw it as opportunity. So I told her everything. Every detail. How I walked in on them. How I left everything behind. How I rebuilt. By the time I finished, my throat hurt. Claire sat there silently, then closed her laptop. "I believe you," she said softly. "But Evan, he's not going to stop. He's escalating." And she was right. Because the next day, I got a call from my boss. "Evan," he said, voice tight, "I need to ask you something. Did you really send those emails?" "What emails?" He paused. "The ones about your clients. Someone forwarded them to me, messages from your address saying you were planning to poach them for a competitor." My blood ran cold. "That's not me," I said immediately. "I'd never." "I figured," he said. "But IT traced them to your old personal email. The one under your name." That's when I knew. Tyler had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Because this wasn't just personal anymore. He was coming for everything. My marriage, my job, my peace. And I couldn't let him win again. But before I could even plan my next move, something happened that shattered whatever control I thought I still had. 3 nights later, Claire got a call while I was in the shower. When I came out, she was standing in the doorway, white as a sheet. "Evan," she whispered, "he's here." "Who?" She pointed toward the living room window. I followed her gaze and froze. Tyler's truck was parked across the street. Engine running. Headlights aimed straight at our house. And when I stepped closer, I saw him sitting behind the wheel, holding something up to the glass. It was a photo of my daughter, smiling, unaware. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was war. I don't think I've ever known fear like that night. There was something about the way Tyler sat there in his truck, perfectly still, headlights slicing through the dark like a spotlight on every mistake I'd ever made. I could see his smirk even from across the street, faintly lit by his dashboard. He wanted me to know he was there. Wanted me to feel powerless again, like that night years ago when I walked in and found him with Lauren. The same violation, the same cold rush through my veins. I didn't call the police right away. That was the part that still haunts me. I should have, but part of me believed he'd drive off after a few minutes, that this was just another one of his games. Instead, he sat there. 15 minutes. 20. 30. watching the house. Claire kept our daughter upstairs, and I stood by the front window, watching him back. Two grown men playing a silent, sick-staring contest through glass. Finally, I opened the door and stepped outside. "Get out of here, Tyler," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He rolled down the window, that same infuriating grin plastered on his face. "Relax, man. Just wanted to talk. You don't talk by parking outside my house at midnight." He shrugged. "Didn't think you'd answer if I called. Because I told you to stay away." He laughed quietly. "You always were dramatic." Something in me snapped then, not the kind that explodes, but the quieter kind that decides it's done being afraid. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You need to understand something. Whatever game you're playing, it ends tonight. You come near my family again, and I'll make sure you regret it in ways you can't imagine." For the first time, I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. A hint of fear. He covered it with a smirk, of course, but it was there. "Careful," he said. "Wouldn't want to make threats." "Then don't give me a reason to." He didn't answer, just rolled up the window and drove off slowly, like he'd won something just by making me come outside. After that night, everything unraveled. I filed a police report the next morning. They took it seriously, but not seriously enough. "We'll keep a record," the officer said, typing into a computer. "If he contacts you again, let us know." The subtext was clear. Until he does something tangible, there's not much they can do. Claire was shaken. For weeks, she barely slept. Every noise outside made her jump. We got cameras, changed our locks, even stayed with my brother-in-law for a few nights. But the damage was done. I could feel it in her distance, in the way she looked at me, not with blame, but with exhaustion. She was tired of living in someone else's shadow. One night, I found her sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "Doing what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Living like he's still part of our lives. Every time you look out the window, every time your phone buzzes, I see it. The fear, the anger. It's like he still controls you." "I'm trying to stop him," I said. "I know, but it's destroying us." We didn't argue after that. There was nothing left to say. She didn't leave me, but she started pulling away, emotionally first, then physically. She spent more nights at her sister's, saying she wanted our daughter to feel safe. I couldn't blame her. That was rock bottom for me. Sitting alone in the house I'd worked so hard to build, lights dim, cameras blinking red, waiting for a truck that may or may not return. My job was hanging by a thread after the false email accusations. My wife was half gone. My mother was dead. And the one person who'd caused all of it was probably sitting somewhere laughing about it. For a long time, I stayed angry. But then the anger shifted into something colder, clarity. Because in all his chaos, Tyler had shown me exactly who he was. He thrived on reaction, on chaos. He wanted me desperate, reckless, loud. So I decided to do the opposite. I went quiet. First, I changed my number. Stopped posting online entirely. Deleted old accounts. Every trace of my personal life, gone. Then I spoke with a private investigator, a former cop named Harold who specialized in digital harassment cases. I told him everything, down to the last text and photo. He listened carefully, nodding, then said something that stuck with me. "Guys like him always slip up. They think they're untouchable, but they leave fingerprints everywhere. You just have to stop trying to fight him emotionally and start fighting him smart." That became my new philosophy. Fight smart. While Harold began gathering information, I focused on rebuilding what I'd lost. My company, the one I'd nearly been fired from, had recently started a new division. I threw myself into it completely, working late, taking on new projects. Within 6 months, I'd not only cleared my name but gotten promoted. The timing was poetic. While Tyler spent his nights lurking around bars and old memories, I was finally climbing out of the hole he'd thrown me in. Money improved. Confidence returned. I moved us into a safer neighborhood, closer to Claire's family. She noticed the difference, the calm in my voice, the lack of bitterness. Slowly, we started to find our rhythm again. We'd go on walks, cook dinner together, talk about normal things. For a while, it felt like maybe the storm had passed. Until Harold called. "I've got something you'll want to see," he said. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town. He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, phone logs, and, most damning, a series of emails. Tyler had been using a fake name to send anonymous tips to my company, to neighbors, even to local community groups. Lies about me, about Claire, about our finances. But what sealed it was a receipt, a digital trail leading straight back to his IP address. You can press charges for harassment, impersonation, and defamation, Harold said. And if we push the child safety angle, the photo of your daughter, that's another layer entirely. I looked down at the stack of evidence, the culmination of months of quiet observation. It wasn't the satisfaction I'd expected. There was no thrill, no vindictive joy, just a deep, steady certainty. Not yet, I said finally. I'm not done. Because while I could have gone to the police right then and there, filed every report, I wanted something more. Not revenge, not in the cheap, impulsive sense. I wanted him to experience what I had, the slow realization that his power was gone, that the person he'd once toyed with had quietly built something stronger than he could ever touch. So I started planning. Not rashly, but methodically. I found out where he worked, or rather, where he barely worked. A small auto shop, underpaid and mismanaged. He'd gone from the charming life of the party to a man who scraped by, blaming everyone but himself. His landlord was threatening eviction. His truck payments were months overdue. It was almost too easy. I reached out to a lawyer, not to sue him yet, but to prepare everything. I started documenting every piece of harassment, every text, every sighting, every digital footprint Harold had gathered. Claire didn't even know the full extent. I wanted to protect her until it was done. But here's the thing about rebuilding yourself. Once you stop reacting, once you stop letting anger drive you, people underestimate you. Tyler did. And while he was busy trying to drag me back into his chaos, I was quietly setting the stage for something he'd never see coming. If you'd told me a year ago I'd be sitting across from a judge with Tyler's future in my hands, I'd have laughed. Revenge, in movies, is dramatic and loud. Car chases, smashed windows, shouting in the rain. Real-life revenge is paperwork, patience, and the quiet accumulation of facts until they harden into something unignorable. That's what I built. Not a spectacle. A trap so tidy he would blunder into it himself. After Harold turned over everything he'd found, I stopped pretending this was about pride. It was about safety. For Claire, for our daughter, and for whatever piece I had left. Harold handed me a printout that mapped Tyler's online behavior. The fake accounts, the IP addresses, the timestamps tied to nights he claimed to be with friends. We matched that to bank receipts for payoffs he'd made to kids at his old bar to spread rumors. We found a line of small charges on his card that matched overnight motel bookings near our daughter's school region on the same days anonymous photos had been taken. It was sloppy arrogance at its finest. He'd assumed no one would connect the dots. That's when I started working the angles. The law was won. Harold's evidence gave the police probable cause for harassment and stalking. The first time I handed files over to Detective Morales, she actually leaned back in her chair and said, "This is thorough. Good work." The arrestable stuff was the photo of my daughter and the pattern of impersonations. I didn't want to rush to jail just to prove a point. I wanted something more permanent, legal restrictions that made it impossible for him to casually pop back into our lives. So we built the case, piece by piece, until the district attorney agreed to file. But legalities are limited. Judges could order him away, and the court could tell him to stop contacting us. But Tyler still had people who liked him, and he still had a small town's worth of gossip on his side. So I layered strategy on strategy. I found his landlord through public records and quietly paid a visit, not to beg, but to lay out the facts. Unpaid rent, noise complaints, and the P.O. boxes forwarding suspicious mail. I didn't threaten the man. I offered him certainty. If he evicted Tyler for cause, the landlord would avoid weeks of headaches and potential liability. It wasn't romantic, but it worked. 2 weeks later, Tyler was served, eviction notice in hand, and his landlord's face when he packed up his things was the same expression Tyler used to show when he'd lost something. Priceless. At work, I found leverage through a different path. The auto shop he punched time had a small owner, people who cared about reputation. I talked to the owner in a way I never would have before. Calm, factual, never accusatory. Harold provided screenshots of Tyler's harassment and a timeline that showed he'd used the shop's Wi-Fi during the same nights he'd messaged under aliases. A bridge I didn't expect, but there it was. Within a week, Tyler came in to find a box on his bench, his paycheck, his uniform, and a terse note stating his last day. No drama, just a livelihood removed, which hit him harder than the threat of jail. Losing his job was the first real fracture you could see. But the most satisfying part, if you can call it that, was how public I made his private cruelty without being cruel in return. I met with the PDA at my daughter's school, not to air personal grievances, but to ask for common-sense measures. Increased camera coverage at drop-off, a parent volunteer system that verified people picking up, and a simple announcement about digital safety and anonymous reporting. I handed them the evidence as something the school should be aware of and watched the room of tired, practical parents react the way sensible people do, by protecting their kids. The principal personally thanked me and said, "We'll take this seriously." I left the meeting knowing Tyler's methods, small terror, quiet intimidation, were being neutered by light and process. There was also the social layer. I didn't want to turn this into a witch hunt, but I did want the people who still adored Tyler to see him clearly. So I let the facts speak in the places that mattered. I quietly gave copies of the harassment timeline to a few mutual friends who'd been on the fence, people who knew him in the old days. I didn't smear him. I didn't beg. I just asked them to consider the evidence. Some were shocked, some defensive, but enough of them stepped back. The people who used to host his poker nights no longer did. The bar that once gave him a tab asked him to stay away. Social capital, as it turns out, can be more devastating than any courtroom gavel. Meanwhile, I built my own fortress. Work absorbed me in a way that felt purposeful instead of reactive. I took on a project that put me in front of clients I'd only dreamed of landing before, a regional rollout for a tech partner that, if it went well, would triple our new division's revenue. I worked late, loved my family by returning to it fully, and polished the parts of me Tyler had tried to tarnish. The promotion followed. The money followed. The sense of agency, finally, followed. And then the last step, the quiet stroke that felt like the end of a long argument. With Harold's help and the DA's files, we had a hearing date for a temporary restraining order and a criminal harassment investigation. I wanted the hearing to be public in the sense that the judge would hear the pattern, not the gossip. So I prepared like I was giving a presentation, printed exhibits, clean timelines, a calm summary of how his actions escalated and the tangible effects on my family. No yelling, no theatrics, just cold, undeniable proof. In court, Tyler's bravado was thinner than when he'd stood in my apartment 5 years ago. He arrived in an ill-fitting suit, the color of desperation. His lawyer blinked aggressively at the stack of documents I had in front of me. They asked for delay tactics, for more time to investigate anonymous messages. The judge, who clearly had heard of similar games, cut through the noise with a single line: "Facts matter." By the time it was over, the temporary restraining order was granted, and Detective Morales had an assignment to follow up, underlining that if he breached it, there would be consequences beyond eviction. When the sheriff served him the order, I watched him absorb the reality of legal boundaries. He tried to laugh it off, to make it a joke. But the look on his face when he realized crossing those lines would put him in jail was one I'd waited years to see. Not vindictive joy, just a quiet satisfaction that the man who had reveled in my helplessness now read the same paperwork I had carefully assembled. He had limits now. His truck, his job, his social life, all fraying. That night, I sat with Claire on the porch, our daughter asleep inside, and felt a weight lift I didn't even know I'd been carrying. We weren't out of the woods. The legal system is slow, and Tyler had plenty of time to make one last desperate move. But for the first time in years, we weren't reacting. We were the ones setting the pace. Claire squeezed my hand and said, "I'm proud of you." It felt like the sun after a storm. And then the call came. Not from Detective Morales, not from Harold, but from someone I hadn't heard from in months, Lauren. Her voice on the phone was brittle, like old glass. "Evan," she said, then stopped. I braced for the usual apology, begging drama. Instead, she whispered, "He's not himself. He's saying things, dangerous things." "What do you mean?" I asked. She took a shaky breath. "He keeps saying he's going to make you feel what he felt when you left. That he'll take everything away. That he's clearing the board." I didn't want to alarm you, but be careful. I could have put the phone down then and assumed it was empty threats. Instead, I told her to keep away, to call me if anything happened, and to go to the police if she felt unsafe. She promised and hung up. That was the last day I slept without watching the driveway. 2 nights after the hearing, Harold sent me one more packet of information. It was small, A single receipt he'd pulled from an old vendor subpage tied to a company that sold locksmith services for small businesses. Many evenings, Tyler had lingered at sites related to locks and security. Alone, that would mean nothing. Together with his truck outside our house at midnight, and his talk about clearing the board, it read as something else: preparation. I told Harold to track purchases, to look for anything beyond harassment, anything that could escalate into actual physical harm. Harold nodded, and then said something I wasn't prepared for. If he tries to escalate, he'll need a place to go. People like him don't plan that far. They improvise. It's our job to make sure he has fewer options every step of the way. A week later, something small and beautiful happened. Tyler tried to serve a notice on my brother, someone he thought might be an easy target for intimidation. Instead, he walked into my brother's workplace and was met by a man who recognized him from a decade-old bar fight and promptly called security. The man who once could walk anywhere with a swagger now had a security escort out of someone's building. Rumors and reality were finally colliding for him, and the collision was not in his favor. I won't pretend there wasn't a rush in me when that picture arrived in my phone. Tyler being led out by security like a disgraced mascot. But it wasn't the victory I expected. It was quieter, a small step. The bigger payoff I wanted was to remove his ability to cause harm in the way he had for years. Access, anonymity, and the community's blind spots. I'd taken his access away, I'd taken his anonymity away, and now I was systematically taking his allies away. Then the last piece fell into place almost by accident. One of the mutual friends I'd given the timeline to was a local contractor who did background checks for small businesses. He called me and said, "You should think about the community. People like Tyler can't work where they want if everyone knows the truth." He offered, quietly, to pass along what he'd learned to a network of small employers who valued safety. Within days, a few places that would have been natural next steps for Tyler reached out to me, asking if his behavior had been documented. I shared, and the responses were immediate. "We won't hire him. Not here. Too risky." The dominoes I'd quietly lined up were falling. That was the cleanest part, watching the supports drop away and seeing the man who'd once taken everything from me shrink into someone who had nothing left to wield but bitterness. On a Friday afternoon, less than a month after the restraining order, Harold texted a single line. "He's packed up. Out by noon." Attached was a picture of an empty truck in a driveway 3 blocks from our house. No taunting, no triumphant grin, just emptiness. I felt relief, sure, but also a strange hollow. Revenge, when taken calmly and smartly, loses the theatricality that makes it pleasurable in movies. It becomes a practical thing. The eviction notice had been served, the job gone, the restraining order in place, and his social life evaporating. He couldn't legally contact us. Employers closed doors, friends dispersed. The system had done what I had guided it to do. That evening, Claire and I sat on the couch, our daughter asleep between us, and we talked about what safe looked like. We planned vacations, updated security, and did the small rituals of people who want to reclaim ordinary life. Harold called to say the DA wanted to talk about pressing charges if Tyler breached the order. Detective Morales said she'd increase patrols for a while. It felt like the world had tilted back into place. And then, just as we allowed ourselves a deep, long breath, my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw an unfamiliar number. For a second, panic surged up, the old reflex. I nearly flinched before remembering the restraining order. Then I opened the message. It wasn't from Tyler. It was a photo, crude and hastily taken from afar, a storefront with a sign half assembled. Someone had spray-painted the letters across the awning in bright red. The text beneath the photo read, "You can take his life apart, but can you keep the pieces safe?" No signature, no explanation. I showed it to Claire, who went pale. Harold answered on the first ring, his voice quiet. "This isn't over," he said. "He's still looking for ways in." I sat there, the picture in my hand, and understood that what I'd done had been effective, but it might not be final. Tyler had been cornered, yes. But cornered animals are dangerous in ways you don't always expect. So I did what I had learned to do these past months. I stopped reacting and started preparing. I thought I was ready for anything. Then Lauren called again, voice trembling, and said, "He said he has one thing left to do. He won't tell me what, but he keeps saying the reveal." My mouth went dry. If he has an idea of how to hurt us that involves what he's already lost, I don't know what he'll try. I told her to go somewhere safe. I called Harold to pull every thread he could find. I checked cameras, rerouted our routines, and called people who owed me favors. I felt the old fear, but it was tempered now with a different thing: resolve. The quiet, methodical resolve that had built the trap in the first place. Then, in the hush of night, the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang once, just once, but the sound carried through the house like a gunshot. Claire froze in the kitchen doorway, her hand gripping the counter. The night outside was silent, except for the hum of the porch light. My daughter stirred upstairs, mumbling in her sleep. I motioned for Claire to stay back. When I reached the door, I didn't open it right away. The camera feed on my phone showed nothing at first, just the empty porch, bathed in amber light. Then, after a few seconds, a figure stepped into view. Tyler. He looked awful, disheveled, pale, hair sticking out like he'd been sleeping in his truck again. His clothes hung loose on him, and his eyes, once sharp and calculating, were bloodshot and wild. He wasn't smirking anymore. "Evan," he said, voice muffled through the door. "I just want to talk." I didn't answer. My finger hovered over the phone, ready to call Morales. He stepped closer. "You think you've won, huh? You think you can take everything from me and just move on?" I stayed silent. He laughed, loud, unhinged. "You ruined my life. My job, my apartment, my friends, everything." He slammed his hand against the door. "You were supposed to be my brother." Claire flinched at the sound. I signaled her to grab our daughter and go upstairs. He hit the door again. "You turned everyone against me." Then, quieter, "I just want my life back." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "You made your choices, Tyler. Now live with them." There was a pause. Then, softly, almost childlike, he said, "You think you're better than me." I didn't reply. He let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a growl, then hurled something against the door, a small object that clattered to the porch floor. The motion light caught it as it rolled. A photo of me, Claire, and our daughter at the park. Then came the words that made my blood run cold. "Enjoy your perfect little family while it lasts." That was enough. I hit call on Morales' number. But before the line connected, I heard the distant wail of sirens coming from down the street. And then another sound, tires screeching, doors slamming, footsteps. Through the window, flashing lights painted the walls blue and red. 2 police cruisers pulled up fast. Officers shouted for Tyler to get down. He didn't resist. He didn't even look surprised. He just dropped to his knees, eyes fixed on my door. When they took him away, I didn't feel victorious. Just empty. Watching him disappear into the back of that cruiser was like watching a ghost finally realize it wasn't welcome among the living. The fallout came quickly. The restraining order violation, combined with the stalking evidence, gave the DA everything she needed. Add in the digital harassment and the school photos, and Tyler was suddenly facing real time. Not months. Years. Morales called me a few days later, her tone professional, but not cold. "They found his truck packed with clothes, a crowbar, and a list of addresses," she said. "Yours, your brother's, your office. Even Lauren's." I went quiet. "He'd been sleeping in that truck for almost a week," she added. "We think he was planning something, but we caught him early." It was a strange kind of relief, like a fever breaking after a long illness. For years, I'd carried the weight of his presence, always wondering when he'd resurface. Now he couldn't. Lauren testified in exchange for immunity. She told the court how he'd spiraled after the funeral, how he'd grown paranoid, obsessed with me, convinced that I'd somehow stolen his happiness by moving on. She said he talked to himself, argued with people who weren't there, and once spent an entire night writing letters he never mailed, letters addressed to me. When the judge read the sentence, 5 years for criminal harassment, 2 more for violating a restraining order, Tyler didn't react. He just sat there, staring at me across the courtroom with those hollow eyes, like he was trying to remember who I was. Lauren avoided my gaze, but after the hearing, she caught me outside. "He's gone now," she said quietly. "You can breathe." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. Life after Tyler wasn't immediate peace. It was gradual, like learning how to walk again after years of limping. Claire and I started couples therapy, not because we were broken, but because we wanted to make sure fear didn't become a habit. Our daughter grew older, blissfully unaware of how close darkness had come to our doorstep. The house felt lighter. I'd catch myself standing on the porch some evenings, expecting to see headlights in the distance. But there was only quiet. Harold stopped by one day with a grin and a folder. "Official closure," he said, handing it to me. Inside were the final reports. "Case closed, restraining order permanent." He clapped my shoulder. "You did it right, Evan. No shouting, no fists. You let the truth do the work." "Did it feel worth it?" he asked after a pause. I thought about that for a long moment. It felt necessary. He smiled. "That's usually the best kind." 6 months later, something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail, no return address, postmarked from the state correctional facility. My instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. "Evan, I finally get it. I wanted to be you because I hated myself. You were everything I pretended to be, stable, respected, loved. I thought taking what you had would make me feel whole. It didn't. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to tell you that I was wrong. You didn't win, and I didn't lose. I destroyed myself. Tyler." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer of my desk, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of what obsession costs. That night, I took Claire and our daughter out for dinner. Nothing fancy, just our favorite diner, the one with the red booths and jukeboxes that still played old songs. As we ate, I watched them laugh about something silly, the sound warm and real. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not triumphant, not bitter, just free. When we got home, I stood on the porch again, breathing in the night air. The cicadas hummed. A soft wind rustled through the trees. No headlights, no shadows, no ghosts. I thought of my mom then, her voice echoing from all those years ago. "Some people only love you as long as they're ahead of you." She'd been right. Tyler had spent his life chasing the illusion of winning. I'd learned, finally, that peace isn't about beating someone else. It's about refusing to play their game. I looked up at the stars, then back at the house where my family slept, safe and sound. And with a quiet smile, I whispered, "Checkmate."